Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome members and officers to this Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting and welcome anyone watching online and indeed in the room. And thank you for our presenters tonight. Before the meeting starts, I would like to invite the committee member and scrutiny officer to explain how proceedings will work and undertake a roll call of those attending online remotely. Over to you, Susan.
Can I confirm the following officers joining remotely can hear us and we can hear them? Joe Dufficy.
Good evening, present.
Geraldine Goodwin.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
And Steve Cobb.
Good evening, I'm present.
Are there any other officers in attendance remotely tonight that I haven't called out? If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. The normal procedure rules in respect of debate and times to speak will apply. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the results will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? I will now hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, moving on to the agenda. Item number 1, apologies for absence. I have one apology from Councillor Ian Moody. Are there any other apologies? No, not by the look of it. Brilliant. Moving on to item number 2, notifications of other business. There is no other business. Item number 3, chair's announcements. In accordance with council policy, this meeting has been recorded. The recording will be available both on the council's YouTube channel as well as on the council's ModGov site alongside the documentation from this meeting. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed remainder about this and the speaking rights is set up under the chair's announcements on the agenda. For the purpose of clarification, 4.8.23a of the council constitution does not apply to this meeting. Therefore, any member may leave the room during the debate and consideration of that item and be able to vote. However, please be mindful of the business on the agenda and wherever possible, leave in an appropriate point in proceedings. Item number 4, public participation. There is no public participation. Item number 5, urgent and general exception items. There are no urgent and general exception items. Called in items, number 6. There are no called in items and there are no member questions. So that brings us on to item number 8 on the agenda, which is a presentation from Settle. And that's Dean Anderson and Fiona Coulson from the Settle Group to give a presentation.
Good evening. My name is Dean Anderson. I'm Exec Director of Customer Service at Settle. We just wanted to take you through a brief presentation, a little bit about who we are, a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing over the last 12 months, and then an opportunity for any questions at the end. Next slide, please. So I appreciate that many of you know already who we are, but just as a reminder, so we're a Letchworth-based housing association. We've got around 10,000 properties, of which around 8,600 are in North Herts area. Our purpose is to help people who are struggling to find a place to live, and we want our customers to live in their homes comfortably so that they can live the life they choose. Behind that is our key focuses as an organisation, which is about being a good landlord. So we get the basics right. It's about giving voice to our residents so that they value us and the services that we offer. It's about social purpose. So that's creating a place where our residents can thrive. We want to deliver more homes, of which 90% of those will be affordable. We want to provide quality, affordable homes. So it's not just about the delivery of homes, it's about quality products as well, and improve the neighbourhoods of which our properties are based. Next slide, please. So a little bit around the governance of us as an organisation. As some of you will know, we, like the local authority, are regulated by the Regulator of Social Housing, which is part of the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities. So we are highly regulated. We're regulated around financial viability, around value for money. There are consumer metrics alongside viability metrics, and the Regulator of Social Housing will grade a housing association based on a range of metrics. So you will get a V grade between 1 and 4, and a G grade between 1 and 4, 1 being the highest, 4 being the lowest. So Settle currently stands at a governance rating of 1, which is the highest it can be, and a viability rating is 2, which is a highly compliant viability rating. We work within the main legislations that we work within a housing association is the Housing Act of 1985, Homes for Fitness for Human Habitation, and the Social Housing Bill, which was released last year off the back of the Grenfell tragedy. So there was a question put to me prior to joining you all today around the Rental Reform Act. The Rental Reform Act will be a really important piece of legislation, but it's not really relevant to Settle. It's based on landlords who are providing private lettings rather than social and affordable lettings. So the previous mentioned acts are the ones that we work within. The Rental Reform Act won't impact on Settle because we don't provide any kind of private rental product as part of our stock. So we remain a social and affordable provider. Next slide, please. So I just thought I'd take you through some of the stats to give you an idea of what's going on and some of the volumes of what we're receiving. So the first one there is around our contacts. So this is up until December. So we've received 52,000 contacts for a range of different inquiries from our customers. So 10,000 properties, you're looking at roughly 5 contacts per property. Of course, it doesn't quite work like that. Some customers contact us more than others, but on average, it's around 5. So we anticipate by the end of the year, it'll probably be somewhere near the end of the financial year, it'll be somewhere near 80,000 contacts that we've received from our residents. Quite important to us, and on one of our main areas of focus is first time fix. So that's about resolving things at first pass rather than passing our customers from pillar to post. Of course, some things need investigating and we need to physically see them. But we also want to make sure that we can resolve things for our customers if they get in contact with us. So our current first time fix rate is 95%, which is really high, with the other 5% usually requiring a visit or they're more complex cases that we need to get with people and manage them through a process. From an antisocial behaviour perspective, so our regulator monitors on this through their consumer standards, and one of the returns that we need to give is around the volume per 1,000 properties, which might sound a little bit of an odd metric, but basically it's how many ASB cases do you get for every 1,000 properties that you manage. So we're currently at 2.1 against a target of 4. So it's nearly half under what our target is. So that's a positive performance. The lower, the better. We've got quite robust antisocial behaviour policies in place, and we have specific staff, our community safety partners who work with colleagues in the police, colleagues in the councils and other stakeholders to support and manage antisocial behaviour through our areas. From a complaints perspective, we've averaged 0.9 complaints per contact. So around about 400 complaints that we've received so far this year. Complaints are monitored and managed by the Housing Ombudsman Service, who work closely with the Regulator of Social Housing. So there are a 2-stage complaint process for our residents to go through. The first stage is to raise the complaint, and we'll try to resolve that. If they're not satisfied with the resolution for that, it will go to stage 2. At that point, we've exhausted what we can do, or we feel we've exhausted what we can do. A resident has the opportunity to take that to the Housing Ombudsman, and the Housing Ombudsman will make a a judgment based on what they see from us, what they see from the customer, and we abide by that. There are also timeframes that we need to work within for our complaints, and we have resolved 98% of our complaints within the housing ombudsman timeframes. Probably a last stat just to focus on this before I get into some more of the property detail. 96% of our residents feel treated fairly and with respect. And the way that we measure that is through tenancy satisfaction measures. So tenancy satisfaction measures are, again, something that's been stipulated by the regulator of social housing. These are a range of metrics that we need to ask customers. It's in effect a satisfaction survey. There's 12 questions on that satisfaction survey, and that's asked to a range of customers to provide feedback, and that's where the 96% comes from. By the end of this financial year, we'll have surveyed 20% of our customers against the TSMs, which is a high number in comparison to our peers. Next slide, please. Just some statistics around some of the investment that we've been doing. So we've considerably increased our budgets around our investment in the quality of our properties over the last 12 months. We're now investing 13 million a year into our properties. So that's moved from 2021, where it was 8 million, up to 13 million today. So quite a big investment that we're making in our properties. Year to date so far, up until December, the end of December, we'd refitted 38 roofs. Obviously, they're quite big jobs to do. We put 517 new heating systems in, and that's a mix of gas boilers, but also looking at modern methods of heat. Things like underfloor heatings, things like air source heat pumps, etc., are some of the heating initiatives that we've been looking at. And Fiona's going to come on to some of the green initiatives that we're taking part in at the moment. We've put in 447 windows, 233 new kitchens, and 122 new bathrooms into those properties. And we currently sit at 97% customer satisfaction rate for the work that we've done in those properties. So again, customers are satisfied with the level of investment that we're making in their properties. I'll hand you over to Fiona.
So on our journey to net zero, we've actually been successful bidding with the Greener Hearts Consortium to secure funding through the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Settle were successful with a bid of £5.2 million that we've had to spend as part of that consortia. The overall consortia secured 14 million of that grant pot. That is available for homes that are under EPC C. So we've already in plan now with a programme of works to improve properties that are below C using that grant funding. There's a number of different metrics that are used and different measures depending on the type of property. So there's a survey carried out for the property, and then the measures that are appropriate to that property are implemented to improve those individual properties. So we're kind of making good progress with that. As you can see on the screen, we're on track to achieve our deadlines for this year in terms of getting that money spent. Next slide, please. The Decent Homes Standard. Do you want to say a bit about Decent Homes?
Yeah, can do. So Decent Home Standard is a requirement for us as a social and affordable landlord. We need to make sure that we meet a standard, which is currently Decent Homes. There is a likelihood that there is Decent Homes 2 coming very soon, but it's just in consultation period at the moment. So we've got 99.6% of our properties are decent. So we've got 21 non-decent, which is quite typical for this time of year. So by the end of the financial year, those 21 properties will be up to decency. So we'll do the investment work into those properties that are required to get them to decent standard level. Next slide, please.
So most, I think, people around the room will be familiar with the first phase of the regeneration programme that we completed and occupied last year. the image on the screen is of Kingfisher House, and we've had residents living there next to the second phase, which was on site with Jarvis. Unfortunately, Jarvis went into insolvency in March last year and were immediately off site. It wasn't something that anyone could have predicted happening. And we had, I think, 3-month gap when we were able to get back on site. We were lucky to have skills within the team to directly manage the contract to get it up to roof level. So that has now completed. We're now at roof level, and we've got a contract signed with Lovell to come in and complete the works. So we weren't going to complete the whole thing ourselves. That was a bit too much of a stretch, but we were able to get them up to roof level. To have the scheme off-site for 3 months was a real result, because we've got other Jarvis sites we're aware of where they're still not back on site that went at the same time as ours. So we're really pleased to be moving on to the further phase and to get that completed. The target is to get it completed towards this time next year. So 2025, we'll have the 46 homes next door to Kingfisher House finished. Next slide, please. And there's a picture of it up at roof level now. So we're really, really pleased with the progress we were able to make there. The second round of regeneration we have is here in Letchworth at the Hawksley Bungalows site. And the planning application for this redevelopment is due to be submitted any day. It's hopefully the end of next week, but we're kind of working through it, but it's very, very, very close to being submitted. And that scheme will provide 157 new homes on the site. There are currently 80 in total that are being redeveloped. So we've been able to make really good use of that land to produce new homes. The planning application will probably take 1 to 2 years to come through, and then we'll be on site to start building those new homes. Next slide, please. So in addition to the regeneration, we are providing new homes across North Hertfordshire. We work with in partnership with developers through Section 106s, and we've had on the screen, we've got a scheme with Preston that completed and handed over at the end of last year. We were really pleased to be able to provide an adapted bungalow through this scheme, using some adaptation funds and for an identified family that had been on the waiting list for a special adapted unit for some time. That family moved in before Christmas, so we were really pleased to be able to work with Osprey, and Osprey were absolutely brilliant in taking time out of their programme to add the adaptations to make some changes for this specific family. We are also hoping to enter into contract with Osprey to complete another scheme of 33 affordable homes that hopefully will be on site just outside Hitchin earlier this year. So sort of springtime, we think they're going to start on their next scheme. Pleased to be working with them again. Next slide, please. Another developer that we regularly work with is Carla. This is a scheme in Hitchin, the North Herts College site, mostly now occupied. And we are also on site with them at Ickleford with another scheme that they're developing out. Again, they're doing the private sale and we're taking the affordable. We have also just got permission last week to enter into contract with them for a third scheme to deliver another 17 affordable homes. So just an example there of some of the partnerships that we can actually enter into as settled to provide affordable homes in the district. I think that's it.
Are there any questions?
That was my question.
Oh, sorry.
Any questions for Dean Offiona? Councillor David Levitt.
Just in the interest of clarity and openness, I should declare that I'm a settled tenant.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Levitt. Councillor Daniel Wright Mason.
I have 2 questions, if that's all right, Chair.
Sure.
Firstly, thank you very much for speaking. It's very interesting. On the first slide, you said about 90% affordability. obviously in sort of modern housing discourse, I think the word affordable tends to do quite a lot of heavy lifting. So I just wondered, like, how much of that 90% is the dreaded 80% of market rate, and how much is, if you have like a standard rule or?
Yeah.
So when we're dealing with Section 106s through the partners, North Hertfordshire Section 106s are very welcomed with our development team, because they the target at the 80% is for below 3 bedrooms. So we would only be charging 80% of affordable rent if it was under local housing allowance. So everything we do is capped at local housing allowance, but anything over 2 bedrooms as part of the Section 106 is also restricted. So the 3 bedrooms are restricted to 70%, and again they'd be capped at local housing allowance, and the 4 beds all come in at social rent. So yeah, we're really pleased that not all of the districts we work in have these. It enables us to actually charge more affordable rents on these Section 106s. On the schemes that we develop directly ourselves, where we can, we try to do them as social rent. So on the regeneration schemes, they're all coming through as social rent, and the government gives us additional funding to do that. So through Homes England, we get funding at a higher rate to provide homes at social rent.
Yeah, that sounds, yeah, good. My second question was just on your slide about customer service and complaints stats. Were there any metrics that you left off that you also measure, or was that sort of all of them?
So there is a tenancy satisfaction measure around complaints. And we have found through that, so at the minute it's at a 32% dissatisfaction rate, which is high, but actually we're not unique in the sector for that. I think the average is for the sector is around 40 to 50% dissatisfaction. We did quite a lot of analysis on those. Actually, it only relates to 20 customers. But we've done quite a lot of analysis as to the reason why. The question asks about complaint handling rather than anything else like the outcome, etc. Every one of those 20 were dissatisfied at the fact that they had to raise a complaint, not necessarily the way that it was handled. That's not to diminish their dissatisfaction by any stretch of the imagination. We need to work with those customers to make sure that they get a service that meets their need moving forward. But so that was the one that had missed off, but I didn't want to set hairs running by thinking, actually, it looks like a bad figure, but the reality is when you dig underneath it, it's 20 customers that we're working with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Levitt, I did just have the thought this is just for general questions to settle. So as long as it's not about your own property, I'm quite happy for any questions you've got to ask. No, makes perfect sense. Thank you. But Councillor Claire Billing, you were next.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions as well. One is about the maladministration findings by the Ombudsman. I wondered what sort of level that's at.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is about damp and mold, and just sort of some information about how you're tackling that. How many houses does it refer to? Because that's a big thing in the media at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of maladministration, we have had one finding of maladministration this year. It was a complex case that we've actually gone back to the Ombudsman with to review. Because the complaint was related to a boundary wall, which was not Settle's property. So the next door property is an owner occupier, and they erected a wall on their property, and the complaint pertains to that. So we've got that one finding of maladministration so far, but we have challenged that because it's an owner occupier and it's out of our control. Is our thoughts behind it. Obviously, we're waiting for the Ombudsman to come back on us. In terms of damp and mould, so even before the tragic case of Awa Bishak, we'd already set up a specific team to deal with damp and mould. So we have a team of surveyors and operatives who deal with damp and mould when it's identified to us. We've got currently 260, got the stats in front of me. So we've got 260 open damp and mould cases. and we keep them open for a reason, because we want to manage that through a whole process. So we're not in, it's not in our interest to go out and do a mold wash, for argument's sake, which would initially get rid of the mold, but isn't a long-term fix to potentially the problem. So we do keep them open for a prolonged period of time to make sure that we've got sight of exactly what's going on, and if it does return, that we can look into, what is it about the property that is causing the damp and mold. Reality is as I'm sure many of you will know, we've got properties that are 70 years old, that frankly probably weren't built to still be standing here 70 years later. So that proves challenging. We know for some properties we're going to have to keep going back and address the mold, because there's nothing we can do with the fabric of the building to actually change that situation. So it's a case where, we'll be going back every 6 months and treating that issue just to make sure that it doesn't come back for the customer.
Thank you. And Councillor Mason, you were next.
Apologies to my colleagues for being parochial again. I think Alton Ward's going to be getting all the questions tonight. I had two observations and a request. First of all, I wanted to actually offer some praise, which doesn't always happen here, to Settle for the way that you managed to keep the John Barker Place development. As you say, I think 3 months. I think if you'd said at the start it was going to be 3 months, we'd have slept easier in our beds. I mean, it was horrible seeing. I could just see a big block of new social housing just sat there empty. And I think if you could pass on, some of your colleagues I know worked extraordinarily hard to keep that on the road. And it praises due. Secondly, I'm delighted to hear that the Great Wall of Westmill is coming down, the fencing around the development. I think you said, did you say next month? Did I hear?
So the Section 278 agreement is with the County Council to sign. It's finished, it's drafted, we're waiting signatures, and then our team are going to be, before it's handed over to Lovell, who are finishing the building, our team are going to be completing the roadworks, the pavement works. So yeah, we're really close to getting that terrace fencing removed.
It does appear to be along about the same length of time as the Berlin Wall, I think. We're gonna get Bono to play a concert when it comes down.
Yeah, there was actually a maternity leave between the original drafting of the agreement. Somebody went on maternity leave and came back, and it still hadn't been drafted. So, and thank you for your support in kind of getting that moving as well.
Cool. The other request I have, and I think this applies to Westmill, but I think probably applies to a lot of the other bigger estates that Settle own, is one of the things we seem to waste an inordinate amount of time is trying to work out who owns what, who's going to cut back a tree here, who's going to clean a pathway. And obviously it's even because it's a three-way split. Is it county? Is it us? Is it Settle? I hear rumours that there are maps in existence that Settle have. Is there any chance that these could be shared with councillors for the relevant estates?
I think that's a brilliant idea. We've got access, in addition to the maps that we've held internally, to a piece of software, which we've kind of increased the number of licenses that we use now, because we've been using it for development purposes, and it shows titles, it shows ownership. And we're kind of using that more widely internally now to actually kind of identify the wonders of actually being able to get onto the internet and actually see information really quickly. But absolutely, if you've got any questions about ownership, if you contact one of us, we can kind of get into this piece of software quite quickly now in both Dean's team and my team to actually drill down into actual titles and ownership. That's Land Insight, it's called, and so we're using that more and more extensively to kind of drill down, and even just kind of planning and mapping land ownership in order for development purposes, just in terms of things like lighting and who, getting who's the right person to contact to get the light fixed, is that information is more and more readily available.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Levitt, I believe you were next, and Councillor Munzer.
Thank you. I was going to ask a very similar question about the land ownership, actually, because I represent Letchworth South East, the Jackman's estate on there, and I've got quite a few bits and pieces where whose responsibility is this? And we have bits of land and crossover between yourselves, us at District Council, and in Letchworth's case, Heritage Foundation. So yeah, welcome, Matt, and something to actually be able to find out who owns what bit. That'd be very helpful. The other bit I was going to bring up was you talking about the green agenda and improving homes. In Letchworth in particular, we have quite a lot of older homes. I live in one of the oldest ones, I think. I live in Rushby Mead, so mine's one of the oldest solid wall houses. But in other places, we have people with insulation problems. I'm thinking of Bickneld Way and that. But you also have to fit that in with the Heritage Foundation's bits and pieces. How are you getting on with that about the secondary insulation stuff? And as far as that bit's concerned, putting you on the spot.
I mean, I've seen a piece of insulation that the consultants actually brought in to show us that they were really excited because there's either insulation going on internally or externally. So I think a lot of this, where there is a problem with external, and I think some of the Heritage Foundation ones have got the problem with adding the insulation on the external. We can actually add the insulation on the inside of the property as well. So we're looking at solutions, multiple different solutions to make it work. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, can do. So we've got, as we sit here at the moment, 63% of our properties are at EPC or above, EPCC or above. So our focus is on the non-EPC and above, C and above at the moment. So there's been a range of work done. We've got 600 properties that are very low EPC across our estates. We are in the process over the next 3 months of getting into them, undertaking a detailed survey of the property so we can understand what works are going to happen, and that will go into next year's SHDF plan for what we do with those funding. So you're looking at 37% of our properties that we need to get to EPCC over the next 5.5 years.
Thank you, Councillor Manser.
Thank you, Chair. And I think Councillor Mason raises a very, very good point about the maps. You know, one of the first things that I had to deal with, a piece of casework, was sort of, dispute regarding some, effectively, what was fly tipping, littering, and no one really wanted to take responsibility. But one of the issues of which I find when I'm out on the doorstep speaking to settled tenants is regarding either overcapacity or undercapacity. People wanting to do, I think, is what's termed house swaps or something like that. And I was just wondering, particularly in rural communities, people obviously are quite settled at that stage. They don't particularly want to leave. And I was just sort of wondering, what is the policy that you have regarding sort of over and under capacity for your tenants, effectively to make sure that the properties are, utilised to the maximum possible?
Yeah, so there's two answers to that question. The first, to your first point, in terms of property swaps, we have quite robust, it's called mutual exchange process, and we do that through a national initiative called Home Swapper. So you don't need to move from a settled property into a settled property. You could move from any social housing, a settled property, into any social housing provider, providing that individual is prepared to swap with you. So we do promote that, and we do undertake a significant amount of mutual exchanges. So part one, in answer to your question, in terms of overcrowding or under occupancy, overcrowding, we have a shared housing register with yourselves in the council, and obviously they're banded. So if you're overcrowded, that's going to raise you up the banding list to enable you to bid for properties that become available either through Settle or any other social landlord. So that's how we would deal with the overcrowding situation. Unfortunately, we're not in a situation where we can just conjure up properties and go, you can move in here. Could, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way. So we go through the waiting list and the housing list process for that. For under occupancy, real challenge for us, if I'm honest. we have a significant amount of properties where there is under occupancy going on, and there is the under occupancy rate that individual will be paying as a result of that. We've done quite a lot of analysis on this, and what we find is that actually the local ties to that specific area are really strong, and actually people understandably don't want to move out of area, and for us, you know, we can find properties to support in that, but if you don't want to move out of that area, then that reduces the opportunity for us to deal with that under occupancy or over occupancy situation that might occur. So it is a real challenge for us, and we work quite closely with the teams here with the housing list to try and support as best we can to get properties available.
Could I just ask a question regarding the decent homes? Because I think it was something like, what was it, 98% of your properties are decent homes. Now, when a few months having, you know, after being first elected, you know, I was speaking to a resident. It was only by chance I knocked on this resident's door, and she told me that, you know, her property, they're in the bathroom. She had, I think it was an 8-year-old boy, and there's a live plug socket right next to the bath. Now, obviously, that is something which is incredibly concerning. And, you know, to be fair, when once sort of, you know, I raised that with you, you went immediately and you resolved that. But what policies do you have to ensure that that isn't the norm and that doesn't happen, you know, to ensure that actually your properties are decent and that any defects are dealt with very, very quickly? Because, you know, unless you hadn't have dealt with that, then you could have been looking at, you know, something like corporate manslaughter, you know, which obviously doesn't, is pale in insignificance to the death of an 8-year-old boy.
Yeah, so we've got quite robust repairs policies, which that would have been dealt with as part of the repairs process. And we also do stock investment surveys. So we have stock investment surveyors, and we also work with an organisation called FFT, who also provides stock investment analysis. So what that basically means is that we go into a percentage of our properties every year to understand what is within those properties. We, as all housing associations, were curtailed somewhat by COVID. We're now on catch up because we weren't able to get in any properties for 2 years, frankly. So now we're catching up to get to understand what's in our stock. The regulator of social housing has been really clear that they expect within the next 18 months to 2 years that you'll have been into every property within the last 5 years to understand what's in there. So we're in the process of ensuring that's exactly where we are.
Thank you both. Oh, sorry. I had a number of questions here, and quite fortunately, many of them have already been asked. So you'll be happy to know. One of the questions I did have that we haven't sort of brought up so far was FRA actions, and whether you've got a backlog of FRA actions undertaken, or whether you're on top of that.
No, we're 100% compliant. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to hear.
The deadline was the deadline is just passed to be sure that we were 100% compliant. So yeah, we're 100% compliant to sit here.
That's great to hear, because I know many housing associations, and I'm not talking about in North Hertfordshire, are still playing catch up as a result of COVID from that, particularly high-rise buildings in London and all the rest of it. My only other real question I had for you was around the site in Letchworth. I've forgotten the site name, to be fair, but the decamp process that you've got going on, that's the one. And I was just wondering how that decamp process was working, or what your sort of golden thread was for those residents at the moment, and whether
Hawksley bungalows, yeah.
Oh, sorry, yes, the
Yeah.
bungalows.
Yeah.
And I just wondered whether residents were going into sort of long-term lets, or whether they were staying in hotels or various other.
So all the decants at Hawksley are either if people are choosing to come back to the new scheme, then they'll be moving twice, but no, there'll be no hotels involved. And if we've got properties that are suitable on the estate they can move to, if it's in the second phase of the development, then that's an option. But the process is underway. There's a few leaseholders there, so there's some buybacks going on, but there's been some good progress made with the decants, and we'll continue to during the planning process while we're going through the whole planning approval.
Thank you. The only other question I had was very much around the financial standards, and this kind of goes back to the fact that Settle were now rated 2. They got a sort of demotion, I think it was last year or the year before. I was just wondering, how your audits are going in general. Is that sort of on its way back up, or is there still a lot of work to do there?
So the viability rating was to do with, we made the conscious decision to put some additional pressure on our financial metrics so that we could develop. And you'll find that most housing associations that have done similar things were downgraded at the same time to the V2. The V2 is a compliant grade. So just to make that really clear, we're not non-compliant. It is a compliant grade. And it was a conscious decision we made because we wanted to make sure that we were developing affordable homes. It was a conscious decision. We knew that would happen. That's not to say the financial challenges that we're all facing, both on a local and a national level, are not impacting on us. They are. Our operating margin is down, the same as most of the housing associations. But the viability rating, as said, was a conscious decision that we made because we wanted to invest in our properties.
Thank you. I mean, that's really good news, because I think we've got a paper coming later this evening around our empty home strategy and how many homes or people we have on the waiting list. So that was what I was hoping you were going to say the answer was. So thank you. Do we have any other questions at all? No? Well, brilliant. Well, thank you very much. That really was a good presentation. So thank you very much for coming in. Okay, we'll move on to item number 9 of the agenda, which is crime and disorder matters. So Inspector James Lant and Sergeant Chris Adshead from Hertfordshire Police are here to give a presentation on hate crime and policing in North Herts.
Thank you. It'll be myself, Sergeant. I'm Sergeant Chris Adshead. Good evening, everyone. Have you got the PowerPoint? I'll just wait for you to do that. While I'm waiting for that, first of all, I think I ought to offer some apologies from Chief Inspector Hannah Treadwell, who really did want to be here tonight, but unfortunately, due to operational reasons and being on standby on call tonight, she's ultimately not able to be here. But I'm delighted to say that Inspector James Lant, who's the Safe Neighbourhood Team Inspector for the whole of North Herts, is here, and in due police fashion has handed me the responsibility of presenting to you this evening. So we'll do our best. That said, further, I should apologise if this is a bit of death by PowerPoint. However, I think it's really handy to give you some context around hate crime nationally as well as locally. So if I could just go to the next slide. You may feel you may have to press it a couple of times when required. I don't know why. Okay, so I think what we'll do is go through some of the objectives that I've set for this evening based upon the brief that we were given for the Constabulary in North Herts, effectively to try and paint a national picture around hate crime as it stands. The National Police Chiefs Council do publish figures weekly, which are collated by the National Community Detention Team. So it's effectively detention monitoring around the country. So we'll have a quick look at those, or actually we'll probably have quite a protracted look at those. We'll have a look at the picture in Hertfordshire and how that reflects the national picture, how it looks in North Herts comparatively to that. And then I've done a little bit around non-crime reporting, because there's some considerable misconception around non-crime, and effectively just some misunderstanding on what non-crime reporting is as opposed to crime reporting. A little bit around some good news stories, and then the future of hate crime reporting and where we stand in North Herts around how we're dealing with hate crime. So if we go on to the next slide. As you look at hate crime reporting, excuse me, across the board, you do tend to find quite obviously that the national picture and international picture have quite a bearing on hate crime and non-crime incident reporting. And what you'll see, and what I've tried to demonstrate that within this, obviously there's no political agenda in this, but what these figures will show you is how, for example, an international event recently would change figures. and how the reporting is done. So just to put that in some sort of context, obviously, when you look at the figures we're about to go through, just for a reminder, on the 7th of October was the original Hamas attack into Israel from the Gaza Strip. And following that, on the 27th of October, Israel launched a retaliatory assault into Gaza Strip. So just bear those 2 dates in mind as we go through the figures nationally. Next slide, please. I was going to bring this up. Effectively, I can share this on the slides, but I mean, I don't know if you've got the ability to just click on the first of those links, if it will come up or not. I don't know how that's going to work for you. If it doesn't matter. No, okay. So what we get sent is quite a detailed report, and that was 2 examples of the report we get. It's very, very long. I get it each week, and effectively it goes into a lot of detail. However, what I have done for you is brought out of that report, which I say is a national report, some figures to show you, just to go through hate crime and how we see it progressing. So if we go to the next slide, I'll spend a couple of minutes just explaining this slide because there's an awful lot of information on here. But this will give you an idea as to how much we pay credence to hate crime in North Herts, because we go through these figures on a weekly basis. So this is a weekly reporting period from the 6th of October to the 12th of October, bearing in mind the date, the 7th of October, is quite an impactful one. The top left graph there will show you a 6-week picture of hate crime. Please bear in mind these are national statistics. That's a 6-week mapping graph of all of hate crime, not hate incidents, just hate crime that's reported nationally. On the right of that is some text in paragraphs, which gives you a fairly good breakdown. And you'll see, for example, in paragraph 3 or figure 3 of those, it says an increase was recorded, and this is regarding the weekly figures, not that 6 weekly. The weekly figures, an increase was recorded across all 5 hate crime strands. I should stop there and say that the strands of recordable hate crime are race, faith, transgender, sexual orientation, and disability. They're the 5 that are recorded. So an increase was recorded across all the strands, but you'll see that faith there was an increase of 126% in that week. And the bottom set of figures there, I'll move to the middle chart in a minute, but the bottom set of figures is a daily breakdown of that. And you'll see that, for example, here on the 9th and 10th of October, the red section there is faith reporting nationally. So you see there that on those days, there was a significant increase. So paragraph 4, just going back to the text, 4 forces were significantly above their weekly average in reporting, which were BTP, which is the British Transport Police. That covers buses, trains, anything that moves, effectively. Lancashire, which has a demographic very, very different to Hertfordshire, obviously, and may have affected, obviously, those figures, et cetera, et cetera. So that gives you some context around it, but the first 2 of those are significant. And then the chart, which I haven't mentioned, which is the one sort of middle left, is the 4-week rolling average year on year. So in 2022, you'll see that, for example, faith reporting was 123 incidents in the 4 weeks leading up to the final pin in that top graph. I'll take some questions on this in a minute. I can see some blank faces. That's took me a while. And you'll get the comparative figure on that 4-week rolling figure between 2022 and 2023. When you bear in mind these are national figures, you'll see, however, that the figure just prior, I think it is, I haven't got my reading glasses on, but just prior, the fifth part of that reporting was around I think it's 2,000 odd incidents, and you'll see that in the week of this reporting, the final week of those 6 on that chart, it goes up, but it only goes up nationally to 2,305. So you're talking a national difference of 300 crimes being reported. The percentage difference, however, is quite clearly faith reporting. We just move on to the next slide, and I'll just ask anybody got any questions at that point, because it'd be good just if you want me to clarify anything around that slide. No, okay. Oh yeah.
What is a hate crime. How are you defining that? Are you defining that as someone who has been arrested and charged, or just arrested, or how are you working out those figures?
No, it's not. It's not about arresting and charging because sometimes the evidence just isn't there to do that. So it's on crimes which are recorded on police recording systems as having either a motivation or a hostility when committed towards one of those 5 streams. It's a very good question because it isn't any longer enough to say that you perceive that you have been a victim of a hate crime because your bin's been moved and you perceive it's because you have one of those 5 characteristics. There would have to be an act which makes it a hostile act or an act which clearly shows motivation towards hostility towards that group or one of those groups. So it's a very good question, but is any crime recorded? Did I answer it? Cool, thanks. Okay, so the next slide. So we just move on through this week by week. And it's quite important, this, because it will give you, when we come to Hertfordshire and North Herts, it gives you quite a good indication of where we are. So just on that basis, you see then that the figure moves in 2022, that yellow line of 6-week reporting moves slightly upwards. And on the 13th of October through to the 19th of October, in actual fact, it sort of stays relatively the same in 2023 through that period. Although you'll see again in the chart below, the faith reporting, while everything else is pretty much on an even sort of level, the faith reporting is the one that jumps remarkably. It's from 119 incidents to 197 over that 4-week period year on year. And again, if you look at the text, an increase was recorded in 1 hate crime strand on the 3rd paragraph there. And again, that's the faith reporting, which is 54%. And most of the incidents that will relate to events globally at that time will be faith recording as opposed to race. Unless there's any particular questions around that one, if we just move to the next one. So we're now looking at the week, the 20th of October to the 26th of October, which is the week leading exactly up to, or pretty much up to the day of the reprisal attack. And you'll see that we're flatlining around it, although interestingly in 2022, the national trend was a decrease. And you'll see that again, an increase was recorded across 4 hate crime strands. Disability and sexual orientation had slight ones, race slightly, transgender, but a decrease was recorded in 1 hate crime strand, which is the faith. So effectively, that's kind of flatlining, and it begins to lose a little bit of traction in terms of the faith hate crime recording. If we move to the next slide. So this is the 27th of October to the 2nd of November. An increase was recorded across 1 hate crime strand, which was disability, and a decrease again across all the other 4, which is very interesting. I'm not going to try and give you the rationale and reasoning behind these statistics. I'm just giving you the statistics. I think it's not for me to do that. But if you look at the 4-week reporting figure, of course, faith is still in 2022, you'd had 110 incidents reported. Across those 4 weeks up until that last date, in 2023, you've got 314, which is a remarkably much higher figure. And you can see on the daily breakdown, the biggest increase was in faith reporting on the 30th of October. So you given the fact that you don't sometimes see reporting of a crime on the day it's occurred, you may come home from a couple of days at work, or you may have family members who come to you and tell you that you don't know how to report things. So there's going to be any amount of reasons why you might take a day or 2 to report this, and then it has to go on a police system. Then an officer has to go out, and then it has to appear on a criming system, because it might not automatically get crimed. It might be we go and respond, and the officer who goes records the crime. So there's a number of reasons why there might be a slight delay. Which again, if you go to the next slide. From the 3rd of November to the 9th of November, you then see the figure has risen again nationally, albeit on a national basis by not a considerable amount. And on that week, an increase was recorded across all the 5 hate crime strands, but faith, interestingly, 3% of that. So what we're seeing in that 6-week period since that conflict has begun is almost the impact is there from the first event, but the recording doesn't from that point change remarkably over the course of that time, but it is still higher. So the second event hasn't made an awful lot more impact. However, when you look at the 4 forces at the bottom there who are significantly above their weekly average in reporting, again, you see British Transport Police, Gloucestershire, Lancashire, the Met Police. So they're significantly higher, and they're all areas that would have a demographic which would probably contribute to those figures. If we just move on to the next one. From the 17th of November to the 23rd of November, this is national news. It's in the Press Daily. And you'll see that figures begin to drop off. While the 4-week reporting is still from 2022 on faith, it's 106, and it's still running at 293. That figure is beginning to drop. And you'll see that a decrease was recorded across 3 hate crime strands, one of which was faith at 32% drop. So as this becomes globalized and it becomes a little bit more, the impact of it has perhaps dropped a little bit in terms of crime that's committed against people as a result of this conflict. You start to see that figure drop. And critically to this, as you move through the next slide, please, which is the 24th of November, going through to the end of November, it's reached 2022 levels, which is extremely interesting. And again, the next slide, if you move the 1st of December, as we now approach the Christmas period through the 7th of December, it's actually fallen below 2022 figures. I've checked, there is one more slide, which is the 22nd of December to the 28th of December. And you'll see again, it's just following that trend now of crime being recorded as probably a direct result of the international conflict is falling quite remarkably. It's not just going to be that, but let's face it, that's probably going to be the biggest driver of these figures at that time. I've checked, I didn't have time to update the slides because I've only just had it, but the latest figures are out in January, and actually the red line, the 2023 line, is now significantly lower than the 2022 line nationally. Okay. Just conscious of the time. Just moving on. What about Herts? We have the next slide. So in Hertfordshire, how does that map against Hertfordshire? So the information on the next slide. Oh, sorry, can you go to the next slide again? And the next. That's it. So if you look at Hertfordshire as a whole, these figures are taken from our Power BI. So these are live crime reporting figures, and these are it says by month or quarter. It is either or. I've done them by month. The light blue line at the top there is the amount of reporting, and you'll see that it's done by strand. So the light blue one at the top there is racial, which is by far has always been the biggest strand that's recorded. The next darker blue line you'll see at the top, the key there is sexual orientation, and then you've got in orange you've got faith. So I've done it like the 12-month period, because if you look from about September, just prior to the incident in question, the attacks, and then you move through October and November, that faith reporting in Hertfordshire as a whole follows the national trend. You have some level of increase, albeit that it's from virtually nothing to about 20 crimes recorded, and they are crimes. And you'll see that at the same time as that drops, there's a remarkable drop in the racial reporting as well, which I'm not going to try and explain in Hertfordshire. I'd have to check it against other years to see whether that's a trend or an isolated figure, but the figure is there. That's it. So that orange line is the critical one, because that's faith recording, and that, of course, goes up from start September. We go through October when the first attack happens and the reprisal attack happens, and then in November it peaks, and then in line with national recording standards, that drops down to something very equivalent to previous levels. So that's Hertfordshire as a whole during that period. Same Power BI information on the next slide is from North Herts. However, I've presented it very slightly differently here, because you'll notice the reason I've used this Power BI is because you'll notice the top line there is a bar chart of all of the areas of Hertfordshire. So North Herts has been highlighted. And you'll notice then that there is a breakdown of what North Herts has reported and what the strands were. And this is for the period, the last 3 months between 1st of September and the 30th of November. So this is, again, pretty much the same reporting period as we've been looking at nationally and across Hertfordshire. And you'll see that the only strands that were reported were race, where there was 19, in those 3 months, there was 19 crimes, and sexual orientation, where there was 6. There was no faith crime recorded. So I have to say in North Herts, the picture there, because I think largely because of the demographic, there's no difference in our reporting systems to any other force in the country. So the picture there is one of effectively no increase around faith reporting, which I'm delighted about, really, really delighted to say in North Herts. The second set of columns underneath is the total strands. So there were, obviously with the 19 add 6, even given my very limited maths, is the 25 total strands. And that is down, the green Laramies, that's down on the previous quarter, which had 35 reported strands. So we're actually moving downwards in North Herts across that period. And I thought that was very interesting. There was only actually two other CSPs where the total amount of strands came down. That was Broxbourne and Dacorum. So if you just move through to the next slide, we then start looking at non-crime hate incidents as opposed to crimes themselves. I'll explain a little bit about what non-crime is in a minute, but this is just to put some context on this for you, because non-crime reporting is critical for lots of reasons, which we'll go into in a minute. But those very, very thin lines, the top one, if you can just about see it, that runs across is 2021. The grey line, which you can probably just about see, is 2022, and the blue line is 2023. So when you look again at non-crime incidents that we've recorded, and we're very diligent around this because these get measured by HMIC, so Majesty's Inspectors. They're very nationally looking at the picture very, very critically now. So you'll see then that non-crime incidents follow exactly the same pattern. You'll see that they're broken down again into faith at the bottom there, into what they are, those strands in North Herts. And you'll see there that the strands follow the same sort of pattern. That the faith strand across October, there was 11 non-crime incidents, which is an increase, quite a big increase against the line that we've got along there. So faith crime, non-crime incidents, there was a significant rise in North Herts. Crimes, there was no rise. In fact, we didn't have any. This needs to be put into some context, because the question I would be asking at this point is, well, what's the difference? What does that tell us? What is non-crime then? Thank you. You can press it again, Brink. That's it. A non-crime hate incident can be recorded under one of 3 sets of circumstances. And this is the College of Policing guidance. So this is national guidance around what forces must or must not record in terms of non-crime hate incidents. So what is a non-crime hate incident? The first criteria is a bit wordy, but we might as well just read it and make much more sense. An incident is initially reported to police as a crime, but it's not clear from the report whether a crime has been committed or not. We need to record it. So it gets recorded as a non-crime incident until such time as we can establish whether a crime has been recorded. That's because the circumstances will often be unclear, but a record will be made to support investigative actions to determine what's happened and record decisions, etc., etc. Where it's then determined a crime has not been committed, the crime should be cancelled and treated as a non-crime incident. So we still retain the data, we retain the fact that an incident has occurred even though it doesn't meet the crime threshold. We'll have some examples of this in a minute. The second one, if you get the next slide, is slightly more lengthy, but effectively an incident's reported, and the nature of the incident means that it's necessary to record the information for intel purposes, or because it develops to a picture that may develop. I think that speaks for itself. I won't go into all of you can read that for yourselves if you wish. But effectively, we're talking about things like hotspot identification, trends, patterns, which may have a direct influence on how we're going to safeguard the public. So if that incident is, or we think might contribute to a pattern of incidents, or it relates to a certain specific demographic of person, perhaps somebody's got links to an organisation or something like that, we might record it as an incident. Third one on the next slide. Which one have you got there? An incident reported. Yeah, okay. I can't see. You got the incidents reported where the alleged behaviour shortfall of criminal activity. Yeah, okay. So an incident is it falls short of criminal activity. It may become a course of conduct such as harassment. If we haven't recorded the original event, we don't have a course of conduct. So it might be, and I'll give you some examples of this in a second, but it might be there's an incident which doesn't meet the crime threshold. Interestingly, there as well, it says in the second half of that, it may also provide evidence of repeat targeting or other antisocial behaviour directed towards the same complainant or group sharing a protected characteristic. If you just go to the next slide, I've highlighted that. Oh no, I think you're ahead of me now. Sorry, just go back. That's it. I think one before that, you've got some highlighted text. Yeah, sorry, sorry, I do apologize. I've got my reading glasses, so I'm slightly out of kilter with you here. Right, the reason I've put that highlighted text in there, group sharing a protected characteristic, is because it doesn't have to be one of the 5 strands of hate crime for us to record it. For example, I'm aware that there has been incidents regarding the homeless community where, because of their homelessness, they've been targeted. We can record that as non-crime hate because it's still a hate incident. The hostility has been shown. It doesn't need to be against one of the 5 protected characteristics, but national recording will show, it won't show those more isolated ones. It sticks to the 5 strands, and national reporting will go on the 5 strands of hate crime reporting. Okay, I do beg your pardon. So on the next one, then, I think we've gone through that one. Okay, so if you just go to the next one. That's it, just that one. So just to put this into context, some examples, you've got a chance to do some to help me out a little bit here because I'm getting a bit hoarse now. So here's an example from North Herts. Dawn has gone outside her home address, and while she was outside, Ashley has said to her, changed names by the way, out of his house, zebra, to which Dawn has perceived this to be a racist comment due to the fact that her neighbour is a black male and that the two of them combined make a zebra. Now, regardless of what your thoughts are on that, that's a live report that we get in that we then need to record. Okay. So if you just go to the next, if you just click it one more time, if you just cross-reference that to our recording criteria, and it's up there for you to read. An incident is reported where the alleged behaviour falls short of criminal activity. That is not criminal activity. There's nothing that can be said. That person may have their own explanation for that. There's no word. That term isn't one that we're aware of that has racial connotations, and therefore we don't know the context in which it was said. Was it shouted? Was it just something? Could it have been misheard? So an incident is reported where the alleged behaviour falls short of criminal activity, but the surrounding circumstance suggests that behaviour may contribute to or become evidence of a course of criminal conduct, because that on its own is not a criminal offence. But there's every possibility that when we go and make further investigation, we become aware that it's linked to another incident or another couple of incidents which make it a course of conduct. And we can therefore put some context on it around the racial element. So at that point, it would sit as a non-crime incident. So if you just go to the next slide, please. Just one click on that one. That's it, just that one. This is a Letchworth example again. So the informant's been walking over a footbridge at the end of Highover and into Chiltern View. Along the footbridge there are wooden boards which people have been using to graffiti. The informant has noticed the following graffiti has been sprayed, which is a swastika and several unpleasant slogans along those boards. Okay. The informant has taken offence as to what has been drawn on there, and the informant does not know who has done this or when, but thinks it could have been done in the past week or so. So you are the police now, given the criteria you've had. What do we record? That's the difficulty we face. What do we record? Any idea? Okay, well, let's. No, I hope you're holding a thought. Just hold a thought. What do you think based on what we've said? Okay, so we'll just go on to if you just hit it once more. Okay, just that one. Don't forget, an incident is initially reported to police as a crime, but it's not clear from the report whether a crime has been committed or not. There is clearly some criminal damage there, but for it to be a criminal damage, effectively, in order to record it on police criming systems, we need somebody who has been damaged, and we need the owner of that property. We have no idea at this point who owns that property. And actually, in this example, it took us a long time to establish ownership of the little bit of property we were talking about, whether it belonged to Network Rail, local authority, Herts County Council. So there's a slight technical issue in reporting it there. You could say it's a Section 5 public order offence, but nobody is displaying it at the time. No person is displaying it. It's just a slogan. So at this moment in time, we haven't got enough probably to put the crime on, but we are going to record a crime. So we do need the information recorded on the criming systems. If you just hit that slide one, sorry, just the next, that's it. And also, if you just remember going back to the non-crime incident recording, an incident's reported, the nature of the incident means it's necessary to record for intel purposes. It might be because it contributes to or involves people, objects, locations, events, etc., and a developing intelligence picture. If that same color of spray is used with the same sort of font and text and etc. and context around it in other areas of Letchworth, we need to know. We need to put an intelligence picture out. We need to build an intelligence model on that. We need to put it out to local officers to make them aware, report it in if they see it. We don't want this spreading. It's particularly nasty, and if we can find an offender, we will. So that would go down as a non-crime incident until such time as we can cross the threshold into crime. Make sense? Okay. So just moving on then. I'm very conscious of the time, but just some good news stories just to finish with. First of all, we're really hoping to drive those figures up. We hope that there's an increase in hate crime reporting in 2024, because currently I doubt that everybody who's a victim reports it, and we want to know who they are, and we want to make sure we're doing everything we possibly can to record it. So don't be surprised if you see some increase in these figures over the coming year. I shall consider that a success in some terms. We're going to increase the number of third-party reporting centres. Some people don't want to come to the police dressed in uniforms and turning up at their houses in police cars. Some people don't have the ability to. Some people don't speak the language. Some people don't understand the police's role in the United Kingdom in 2024, having come from other cultures. So we need to increase the number of third-party reporting centres, some of which are places like the Ethnic Minorities Forum in Hitchin. That's a third-party reporting centre. Settle is a third-party reporting centre. There's various ones, and we're trying to look to drive those numbers up. Support for True Vision. True Vision is a website which has been put up by the National Police Chief Council for exactly the same thing, third-party reporting of hate crime or first-party reporting, but you can report anonymously, or you can put your details on there. That is all collated by the Metropolitan Police and farmed out to the area under which the report should sit. So we've got that, and you can all do that. I've put a link on there in case you can circulate these slides to True Vision. If you go on there, I've done it. It's a very simple process to report into the Metropolitan Police Service. Increase the number of community advisors. We're now doing a massive drive to make sure that we have people who represent communities. Just recently, we've had the Hong Kongers come to us in Letchworth. Charles from the Hong Kongers, you'll see him in a minute. They're going to be community advisors to us, and they're also going to be a third-party reporting centre. So it's a matter of joining the dots and making sure we've got those people on board, and that we are making sure we've got those centres in place. Victim-focused frontline training. I won't go into that given the time, but that's a piece of work ongoing. We've just increased the establishment of the sergeants who operate the CSUs in Hertfordshire. We had 1 per 2 CSPs previously. We've now got 1 per CSP. So Hertfordshire's put a lot of money into this, because we are the first line managers for the hate crime officers. So we've now uplifted the amount of supervisors to make sure that we're doing the job properly. In North Herts as well, of course, and also the national campaign, so National Hate Crime Awareness Week, etc., which we do as a CSP. So we're very closely linked into North Herts Council around that. And we have a new hate crime officer, and his details are going to come up on the next one. There we are. So if you need to contact him, you can have these slides. And you can, that's Lewis Thompson. He was going to be here tonight, but unfortunately he's been short-term sick, so he hasn't been able to make it. If you just move to the next slide. And just a little bit with the good news. So that's the Westmill Community Centre, and that is the 25th anniversary of the North Herts Ethnic Minority Forum, which I attended. As did quite a lot of other dignitaries. I'm not saying that I'm a dignitary, but there you go. I managed to bag myself a ticket. And just to show you that we do get out and do these sort of level of community events, that's me and one of the very, very hardworking PCSOs we have, and some faces I'm sure you'll recognise there. If you just move to the next slide. This is really just to show you that it's not all talk. We do get out, we're doing this, we're engaging. And that's Charles. I'm sure he won't mind you knowing his name. Lovely, lovely gentleman. And we had a very, it looks like we're socially distanced there. I'll assure you that was recent. But we had a really nice chat. And again, he's now a community advisor and third-party reporting centre. And it's that sort of level of engagement that we're really looking to do, boots on the ground. Next slide, please. Just a bit more networking. So next slide. And finally, that's not me in karaoke. I have to say, that's not, looking at the face of the guitarist and Mo from the Ethnic Minority Forum, you probably thought it was me giving you karaoke, but it's not, I assure you. That is me doing a few words to people who are at that event who are very vulnerable to this. And again, it's a matter of just making sure that message is delivered. We're not just standing at the back, make sure we're out there saying it. And I just wanted to make that key point. This is out there focused work. It's making sure people are aware that we need them to report hate crime, and we take it very seriously. And that was the message of that speech to the Ethnic Minority Forum's 25th anniversary event. Finally, it's over to you. I mean, I hope you found that interesting or informative at the very least. But I think if you press it again, it says any questions. There we are. Any questions?
Thank you, Sergeant Adshead. That was really informative. I think it's the most informative police report presentation I've seen. So thank you. We do have a few questions, so I'll hand over to Councillor David Levitt.
Thank you, Chairman. Third-party reporting centres. I know Charles very well, actually. I know how accessible he is now. He's in one of my units, actually, where I'm from. One third-party reporting centre you didn't mention on there was North Herts District Council, which I would have thought was quite a good third-party reporting centre.
Yeah, I think I've seen this off. They are. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just gave you a couple of brief examples. I mean, there's a list we keep. It's a good question though, because we need to judge and monitor ourselves on that, and we have a centrally held list for all the CSPs, and we're targeted. I say targeted is the wrong word. We're monitoring that level's going up and that we're increasing it. But it's the quality of those. We've done it previously where we haven't concentrated on the reason behind it being a third-party reporting centre, and effectively it's doing a tick in a box. And monitor what comes through it, so we're getting the right people. But any person or organisation effectively can be a third-party reporting centre. For example, Jackie's Drop-In is one. Just anywhere where we can do it. We've tried to work with the placements for asylum seekers. That was slightly problematic because of the dialects. Getting something which they could easily use was difficult. Therefore, we're going where we can in terms of, for example, the Ethnic Minority Forum, places like that. But it's ongoing work, but it needs to be meaningful. We need to make sure people are aware to report and how to report. So we're looking at community advisors to push that message.
Thank you. And Councillor Munster.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for what it was an incredibly educational presentation. And it's obviously really good news that in North Herts, we are seeing hate crime at very, very low levels indeed. I was just going to ask, because obviously, unfortunately, geopolitical events do have an impact here domestically and on hate crime, as you demonstrated with those national figures. And I know the Police and Crime Commission is very, very keen on prevention first, and that seems to be the watchword of the constabulary at the moment. And I was just wondering, because I know in other areas of Hertfordshire, particularly in Hertsmere, where I have colleagues and indeed friends of whom are of Jewish descent, they are very, very concerned about the current situation. They feel very, very vulnerable at this moment in time. And I was just wondering, what steps are you taking as sort of our local police to ensure that the Jewish community in North Hertfordshire, feel safe and are comfortable with sort of, making sure that they are reporting any instances of hate crime to you guys? Do you have any sort of message for them?
Well, I'll hand that in 1 second over to the inspector who kind of leads on that slightly more in terms of the community engagement side. But what I will do, what I'll preface it with just before I hand over, is that I'm really proud that in Hertfordshire we have quite a lot of police networking associations, one of which is the Jewish Police Network. And when we have an event, we like to effectively, first of all, go to members of the constabulary who are from the community. Obviously, the largest community, like you say, is I believe that is sort of Hertsmere, is it? Or yeah. So their links are very strong with the larger population, and that population have links into the North Herts population. So that's or communities, I should say. So that's one way of doing it. We have quite close links because we have police officers who make connections through the staff associations and staff network into those community groups. But there again is where we rely really heavily on community advisors. So we would go to the community advisor wherever the large population of a community is, effectively tap into that knowledge. Is there, and ask them, is there anybody in North Herts that we're not reaching? Is there anybody that you know of that we can go and contact? But if there is, you'd like to think effectively they're already on our radar, and we would sort of lock into that. But it does happen where that doesn't. And we with Charles, I didn't know anything about Charles. So those we're not perfect, and those examples do come up. With the Jewish community, particularly thinking about CST, etc., I'll just hand over to the boss because he can probably give you a little bit more context around it.
Yeah, just to build on what Chris said, I've worked very hard over the last sort of year to 18 months to build relations with the CST, the Community Security Trust. I don't know what awareness there is amongst councillors regarding that organisation. They're a national organisation, but operate at a local level across the country. I know work very regularly in Hertsmere, for example, and they are specialists in providing security advice for the Jewish community, whether it be at a synagogue, whether it be at a Jewish school, but they also offer that advice into the non-Jewish community as well. So, for example, one of their members, Nikki, helped deliver a women's safety event at Hitchin Town Hall last January, which some of you may have attended. It was a very successful event. So they are a very useful link into the community for us in North Herts. I think at a local sort of granular level on the CSP itself, the size of the Jewish community is very, very small. I know there is a synagogue, I believe, in Stevenage or an equivalent thereof. So there is clearly a footprint of a Jewish community to some limited extent, but certainly in comparison to somewhere like Hertsmere, it's extremely small. So I do rely a lot on the CST in terms of getting that messaging out, whether we're talking about community advisor recruitment, which is something I'm really trying to push with them at the moment, helping me make those links locally, because it is quite challenging given the size of that particular community.
Thank you, Councillor Billing.
Yeah, my question was going back to, I can't remember exactly the way you'd phrase it, but there was something to do with about the 5 protected characteristics, and then there were others that you would include. And I just wondered how, because I know for the Equality Act, sex is a protected characteristic, and I wondered what crime against women, for example, or any of the other protected characteristics under the Equality Act, what levels of reporting you get on those.
Well, I haven't prepared any figures around that because it didn't form part of the hate crime brief I was given, unfortunately. So apologies for that. But what I can say is we don't set them. They're set nationally. The 5 strands that are monitored as because they're defined as hate crimes, and they are the most affected groups in terms of a definitive group. If you took violence against women and girls and you included that under hate crime, misogyny, for example, if you sort of take that, it's probably impossible to define that in terms of a strand of hate recording. You would, where do you have to sort of draw the line in terms of a domestic dispute. You go there and it's a partner on partner dispute, and in the unfortunate event that a female has suffered abuse in a domestic incident, that's a fact. And please don't get me wrong, every ounce of our being goes into making sure that person is safeguarded and getting to the bottom of what's happening. However, was it motivated by hatred towards that person because of their gender, or was it a domestic dispute? So it's very difficult then to start recording that as a strand of hate crime. I think I know where you're going with that, and you're right in terms of we have now, for example, the incel movement, which is becoming quite large on our radar in terms of thankfully not in terms of its growth, but just in our knowledge about it and what the incel movement would do. And for those who don't know, that's involuntary celibacy. And it's a movement which got some traction in North America, and it's around it's predominantly it's like a men's group of people who feel affected by not being able to form relationships with women. Effectively, that's where it came from, and the hatred that started to build towards women by this male group. They became known as the incel group. I agree. You know, that sort of level of hostility towards a group should be recorded effectively as its own strand. It isn't currently, but that isn't to say that because it's not a protected, because the protected characteristics and the 5 strands of the hate crime are two different things. But what I would say is violence against women and girls is equally as important as the hate crime that we record. We go very deeply. And I think those of you who sort of know us through the CSP work that we do will know that violence against women and girls is an extremely large part of our working day now. We spend a lot of time on drives to improve violence against women and girls, particularly in the nighttime economy and domestic incidents. So the fact it's not recorded under one of those strands doesn't mean it's not recorded or dealt with. But I take your point, there are other groups. And the point I made in the presentation was, if there is another characteristic which joins a group of people together, i.e. homelessness, or you could say perhaps, I mean, you could try and struggle to think of another example, but that's the one I know of. That community do suffer quite horrific abuse sometimes. You know, we've heard of people being quite badly beaten up because they're homeless, and the language that's used when they are taunted or assaulted or whatever. So that would be a hate crime, because those people share a characteristic, and the hostility is towards those people. And this is about victim focus. So if we think that the victim of this crime has been a victim because of a characteristic, in terms of not protected characteristic, but a characteristic which is shared with others, we can record it. We'll record it as hate crime, but it won't appear in those national statistics because it's not one of the recognised 5 strands of hate crime. Does that answer the question? I feel I've just talked for ages. Please don't take away from that, though, that violence against women and girls is in any way underestimated as an issue, because it really is. It just doesn't form part. You'd have to go to somebody who with a much higher pay grade than myself, somewhere in government, to ask why it's not included. But I don't know the answer.
Thank you. We've actually got Chris Hobb here as well, who is, sorry, Steve Cobb. Why did I say Chris Hobb? Steve Cobb, who's doing a lot of work against violence and violence. Yeah, I'm losing my words here. Violence against women and girls. So I was just wondering if Steve Cobb could maybe come in from a council perspective on what we're doing.
Yeah, happy to add a little bit of context, Chair, if that's okay. Let me just
Thank you, Steve. Sorry for calling you Chris.
Trust me, in a regulatory role, I've been called a lot worse. The police, as you would imagine, are a very key partner in what we're doing in terms of the community safety partnership that the council are heavily involved in, and violence against women and girls is one of our 2 major focuses. In this year, we're focusing on ASB and violence against women and girls. And as many of you will know, we're in the process of launching our Women's Safety Charter, which is a CSP project. The charter has been written. We've got a filmmaker lined up. We've got our speakers lined up. We've got a venue. We've got our actors. Very shortly, we'll start filming, and we hope to have our video ready for a rollout by the end of February, which obviously we'll share with members, and there'll be heavy member involvement in that, and the police are involved in that as well. Indeed, James will be one of the people that are speaking in the video. So from a council perspective, we are focusing very heavily on violence against women and girls. And as Councillor Levitt raised, we are a third-party hate crime reporting centre, and we do have a website on that, and we do have links to True Vision as well. So I think that's all I want to add at this stage, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Next up, I've got Councillor Val Bryant with the next question. Let's stop for a break after this, everyone. You'll be assured.
Thank you. I've been at 2 of these events you mentioned in the last year. First of all, at the town hall, and secondly at the West End community event. And I think that Councillor Billing and Councillor Mason didn't don't know if they got on the photograph. They must have been hiding, but they definitely were prominently there. I've got two questions I want to ask, if I may. I gave you notice of these questions, but not very much notice. So I do apologise for that. My first question, at this briefing a year ago, Councillor Tamsin Thomas asked for an update on follow-on actions for the women's safety events that we've been talking about, held in Hitchin in January 2023. One question was specifically around actions taken to improve perception of safety for older women, who were the most represented at the Hitchin safety event, and who spoke compellingly and alarmingly about their lived experience in North Hertfordshire. You mentioned that ECHO survey findings validated this concern. Can you provide an update on this topic and advise on what actions have been taken to improve and learnings from the past year? And I really want to pin down if any action has been taken.
Okay. Given the limited notice, I'm happy to go away and formulate a more detailed response in relation to that particular demographic. Would it be helpful for me to speak more generally about what we're doing in relation to VORG currently at the moment? Is that fine? So just to reiterate Chris's message around VORG is daily business for us now. It runs through our DNA in North Herts Police. It is absolutely a key element of everything we do, and we have VORG in our mind in every context that it needs to be in everything we do operationally. In terms of the sort of headlines of what I'm happy to talk about currently, I'd say we've got two primary strands. Someone mentioned prevention first already, and certainly prevention is always better than having to react after a crime has happened against a woman or a young girl, and we have several strands relating to that. Firstly, we probably mentioned this last year, but part of daily business that has been now for some considerable time, led ably by Sergeant Adshead, is our Operation Gallican, which is around nighttime economy safety, and that's around high visibility patrols every Friday and Saturday evening, but not just wandering around aimlessly, actually engaging directly with licensees, checking CCTV, checking they've got the right number of staff, checking numbers, getting a feel for the place, using our sort of policing judgment. You know, we can normally read quite quickly if a place feels safe or it feels dangerous. Also, an integral part of that is our feelings of safety survey, which you mentioned, Councillor, which is still used every week. We are out there on foot, speaking to females, speaking to young girls, speaking to older people, as and when we see them as well, to gauge that feeling and that sort of temperature check. And I have to say, compared to about a year ago, and Chris has looked at the data, we are seeing a very, very positive theme emerging in terms of that perception. I say perception because it's sometimes the case that an area just feels dangerous, and I fully appreciate that can't always be quantified, and we have to react to that where we possibly can, you know, practically, whether that's through increased patrols, whether that's through other activity to target that particular area. But the perception on that feelings of safety survey that we are receiving does seem to be on an upward trajectory, that we are seeing less reports of that sort of general feel that I remember when the national survey came out some years ago now. It was quite clear many parts of North Herts didn't feel safe to a female or a young girl or an older female, and certainly there seems to be some improvement there. Chris will hopefully be able to talk about Old Savvy in a little bit, but certainly one of the most significant bits of work that I can report on now. It's going to be a bit lacking in detail because it's very early days, but we are going to be launching something called Project Vigilant. This happens in March, and this takes us to a much higher level than what Operation Gallican is. That will still exist. This is something that will be a lot more communication coming out over the coming weeks and months. It's hot off the press, so I apologise about the lack of detail at the moment. But just to give you the headlines, this is around training a select group of police officers to identify concerning sexualised, potentially predatory behaviour in the nighttime economy. In other words, on a sort of covert approach, identifying those individuals early on in the evening who are demonstrating concerning behaviour, which may turn into them attempting to target a female later on, whether that be through a sexual assault or assault or anything of that nature. This is a really significant piece of work. It's based on very carefully scientifically proven training that's been shown to be highly effective in Thames Valley Police, where it's first been used in the Oxford area. And if you wish to Google Project Vigilant and Oxford, you will see some very impressive videos, including one by the BBC Crime Watch series. This could be really groundbreaking from a preventative point of view, and we're just in the process of developing what the North Herts model looks like. I think it's also important to note that us, along with Stevenage, are the two leading CSPs after Watford, where it was first trialled. We are next up to roll this out in Hertfordshire, so we're very much front runners here, and I think that says a lot again about how seriously we take this particular issue. From what I've seen of this model, if it's embedded effectively and the training works and we have the right officers with the right skills, this has a huge potential to make the North Hertfordshire nighttime economy very, very safe indeed. And it's about prevention and not having to deal with the terrible reports of someone being attacked afterwards. We'd much rather not have that victim in the first place. Did you want to speak just about El Sabi for a moment, which is part of this?
Yeah, I mean, El Sabi has been around for some time, and it was effectively driven by, I think that was born from the National Police Chiefs Council as well. But effectively, what it is, it's what will actually form a precursor to what I think is actually a much more rounded version, which is what we're going to do in North Herts around the Women's Charter. But licensing savvy is it's an accreditation system for licensed premises, effectively based on safeguarding and safety. So premises are encouraged to do their own self-assessment of their ability to safeguard with the police's help, and effectively they are scored an initial score, and then we work quite closely with them to make sure that their safety and security is increased. And that's things like how many briefings they have with their staff, whether their new staff are trained in things like brain's gone. Well, other safety initiatives, put it that way. So ask for Angela is one I was trying to think of. So things like that, or there's various initiatives which we like to get them involved in, whether they've got things like cup covers to stop drink spiking, that sort of thing. So just safeguarding they can do. Effectively, once we've done the work with them, they get rescored and they'll get a gold star rating, effectively, to say how safe they are. There are some there are pros and cons around that, but what we're doing in North Herts is we're developing that further into the Women's Safety Charter, whereby we will all work together to ensure those standards are maintained, and it will go a lot further and a lot deeper. Just to add one extra to the inspector's comments there on Vigilant, I'm sure you won't mind me saying, one of the keys to it is that the officers who will take part will be trained as behavioural detection officers. That's pretty critical to it, so that they will be in plain clothes and they will be able to spot signs and symptoms. It actually runs right the way through to the end of nighttime economy evening. So we're out from the officers who are involved will be out from about 7 in the evening to about 4 in the morning. And that's what underpins it. And the behavioural detection officers remain unknown. And effectively there is a call into uniformed officers to go and talk to, engage individuals who display signs. I'm not going to go any further than that because it's a public forum, and we've got a lot of work to do on this. I think that's about as far as we can go with it. I mean, really, isn't it? But we have a date for the first operation for North Herts, which is in the diary now, and the officers who are going to take part are currently sort of in the process of being trained for that. The commitment from North Herts is immense. We're going to be putting officers who would be doing that duty that night on it, and we're also going to be putting a little bit of budget towards it, or offering some sort of rest day working. So there's some money going into it as well in order to make sure we've got the numbers. So there is operationally quite a big input into this, and it will form part of Steve's and our the Women's Safety Charter. There are things that the police can't control around feelings of safety for women, who walk home alone, should be allowed to do that. We don't control street lighting. We don't control very many other aspects which form part of their feelings of unsafety. But what we can do is, where we've got officers on the streets, rather than just drive around or just walk aimlessly, as the inspector said, Project Vigilant will target our resourcing much more effectively to actually making a prevention first initiative into reducing the violence against women and girls.
Thank you. I'll pass to Councillor Munster, and then I believe Councillor Bryant's got a second question, or was it a follow-up? Sorry.
Well, it's sort of it follows.
It's linked. Okay.
Is that okay? Again, at this briefing last year, we talked about the root of VOG behaviour lay with men, and that Herts Police would need to develop their communication strategy to improve engagement with male residents on this topic. I was wondering what actions or learnings there'd been on this over the past year.
Okay, again, I'll have to go away to give a more detailed response in relation to men specifically, but the other strand we're working on is around education. I continue to lead the JAG VORG subgroup, and our focus at the moment primarily is around education, and the current project we're developing in partnership with Community Security Trust that I mentioned earlier. We're going to be delivering training to school professionals, focusing primarily on the secondary school sector in North Herts. Firstly, in relation to awareness of the incel movement, very sadly, having received a briefing from the CST, there are certain age categories that are particularly at risk of being drawn into that world. And it starts sort of mid-teens and goes on into the early 20s where it peaks. So clearly, that if there is an opportunity to educate professionals around spotting the signs of someone who might be at risk of being drawn into that, of course, that wouldn't necessarily just be for secondary school professionals. We're looking for GP surgeries to receive it. Counsellors will be very welcome to be invited, mental health teams, health visitors as well. So it's something we see as being extremely valuable. And again, also linking back to that preventative strand, we've also developed a relationship with a charity called Dignify. They're currently operating in South Hertfordshire, and they develop educational packages for, I think, again, secondary school children relating to online safety. What we're seeing a great deal of are reports of children exchanging sexual imagery. I'm sure you've heard about this in the media. This is sadly quite prevalent, and very often it's females that are young girls that are on the receiving end of that. So they offer a comprehensive education package to help, which can be delivered in schools. I think it's a Key Stage 2 level, all about how to conduct yourself appropriately online, how to not, get yourself, because of course the risk here is that whilst it would be rare that we would take any action, of course these often result in crime reports where people are being recorded as offenders and suspects, and people's details are having to be recorded to at least some extent. And again, we'd much rather that crime report was never received, even if we ultimately don't take any action on it. A record is still made, and there is clearly a gap of knowledge amongst young people, and some young males who think it is perfectly appropriate to do this. So again, if we can get some intervention arranged with our partnership with Dignify, that's also to the good. But yes, Councillor, happy to provide a response to that specific element in due course, if that's okay.
Thank you. Over to Councillor Munster.
Thank you, Chair. And I think it's really good to hear that actually both on hate crime and violence against women and girls, the constabulary, it's a priority for you guys, and that we are making progress, and we're making substantial progress, and we're leading the way here in North Herts. It's obviously really good news to hear. Could I sort of just draw our focus away and sort of talk a bit more on strategy? Because I know that the constabulary now has more officers than in its history, and that's obviously really good news. I just want to know what the situation is in North Hertfordshire. Are we benefiting from that uplift, and would you be able to provide a little bit more detail as to, those benefits?
Specifically, so those are your ward-based officers that who are out there doing the engagement work, if that's what you're asking about specifically. The good news is that in the last few months, we've had an uplift of 2 PCs across the Safe and Neighbourhood team. Sorry, they're now called Neighbourhood Policing Team. As of about a week ago, we've been rebranded. So we were on an establishment of 18 and we've gone up to 20. And that's the first increase that I think we've had in at least a decade. So I appreciate we're not talking about hundreds and hundreds here, but that is still at least an increase. And good news for you, Councillor, they're both Hitchin Rural and Southern Rural PCs. So that is absolutely fantastic news for us. So Hitchin has increased. I'm afraid there isn't any plans for Letchworth or Royston to increase at this time. I would always want more officers to have under my command. Sadly, it's not something that I have within my power. You are absolutely right that we have more officers now than we ever we ever did. Turnover remains an issue in terms of actually retaining these officers and making sure they become experienced, capable police officers, which takes a considerable period of time and considerable investment as well. I know certainly on our intervention teams, who are our frontline 999 response teams, their numbers have increased, and that is the case in North Herts as well. I can't give you the exact details, but I can provide them for you if you like. So there is an upward trajectory, but it's holding on to them, I think, is now the next challenge. And of course, numbers is great, but nothing beats experience. So whilst we have the highest numbers of officers ever, I think as a proportion, we also have the lowest amount of officer experience as a trade-off, if that makes sense. And we're working extremely hard through tutoring and professional development and training. And of course, some of them do a degree now as well. So they're on that journey. It's just going to take time to kind of reap the rewards of, it's great to have the officer, but we need that experience to go along. And that takes a few good years to get really properly to that point.
Thank you. Over to Councillor Debenham.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I did send you this in advance. Last week, us at North Herts Council passed a motion to support the White Ribbon Initiative, which is a movement of men and boys with the aim to reduce violence against women and girls. And all male councillors have agreed to take the pledge. Would Herts Police consider a similar action?
Yes, I don't think I received that. I think I went to Chief Inspector Treadwell, so I did see that question about 3 or 4 hours ago. I can give good news that Hertfordshire Police is fully signed up to the White Ribbon Initiative. I believe the last campaign was November time, the last national campaign. If you Google Herts Police, you'll see all sorts of details of activities that were undertaken. I do believe that this is led by a domestic abuse investigation team who are based in Hatfield, so they have that sort of overarching strategic responsibility for what that campaign looks like. But certainly, as a county, Hertfordshire, including North Herts, there was a huge media campaign that went alongside that, and I believe there is a list of events if you do want to have a look at what the flavour of that was. So yes, we are absolutely signed up to that, and that was confirmed to me by Chief Inspector Treadwell this evening.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Oh, sorry. Did you have a follow-up?
All right. Yeah, can I have another question? Sorry. Last Thursday, the Domestic Abuse Commissioner reported concerns about distorted police crime data, downplaying rates of violence and domestic abuse. When we had our Letchworth and Baldock priority setting meeting, it was all about speeding, antisocial behaviour. How do we get violence against women and girls on the agenda if we're not reporting them accurately? And what is the North Herts forward strategy for data collection on issues relating to violence against women and girls?
I think the element around domestic abuse, I may need to come back to you to give you a fully accurate question. That sits outside my area of responsibility, and I wouldn't want to give you half an answer and sort of plucking words out of the air just to sort of reassure you. But I'm very happy if you're able to put that bit in writing to me. I will go away and get you an answer. I wasn't aware of the national issue around is underreporting happening or not. So again, I can't comment on it without having a prior awareness. I mean, in terms of how North Hertfordshire record our crimes, our non-crimes, our incidents, we're bound by national guidance and legislation. We have to follow certain standards to record, whether it be a crime. It's under the Home Office crime recording rules, also known as the National Crime Recording System. We're not able to make up a local version of that and sort of interpret it ourselves. We are absolutely bound by those national expectations. So I'm certainly not aware of any issue of underreporting in terms of when we receive a report, we're trying to sort of put it away in the box and ignore it. Everything is recorded, everything is audited. The moment someone picks up a phone to the control room, it's recorded. There's a computer system. Every keystroke we use on our computers is now monitored as well. So they're underpinning our obligations to record crime effectively, including domestic abuse. I think there is a very, very strong basis, and I can only speak at a local level. I am not aware that there is any issue in that regard, and we take our responsibilities extremely seriously, and no attempts made to not crime something properly or under record something, because we just couldn't get away with it, because we also have a crime registrar who monitors every single crime that goes into the system as well, and will often challenge if it's not been recorded properly or misclassified or underreported. that particular example, I don't think is something that comes up very often at all. So I'm happy to take away your other question. Please do send it through to me, and I'll make some inquiries and come back to you with an answer. Is that all right?
Thank you. I don't see any further questions, so thank you very much both for that very comprehensive report and taking so many questions. So thank you. I'm going to adjourn for a short break now to give everyone 5 minutes, and then what I will be doing is I'll be moving the agenda around slightly just to give some officers time to try and get back a little bit earlier. So I'll decide what the agenda is going to be moved around to whilst we have this break, if that's okay. But I'll let everyone know when we come back. So it's 9:20 at the moment. Could I ask everyone to be back by 25 past? Is 5 minutes fine for everyone? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to move over to item 10 on the agenda, which is resolutions to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And I'll follow that up if that is fine with everyone with the empty home strategy, which is item number 12. We'll move on to items 13, 14, and then back to 11, which is the court to account report, before just finishing up. So I'll pass over to James Lovegood. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so briefly on this, there's not much to add. I'll just briefly outline the referrals that were made from this committee on the 9th of January to Cabinet on the 16th of January, were the Council Delivery Plan Q2 monitoring, local plan review, and the 2024 to 2028 marketing and communication strategy. All three of those were approved as per the recommendations from Overview and Scrutiny. The only one that was slightly different was the community survey results March to June 2023, which took into account comments from Overview and Scrutiny members and added in a resolution to ensure that future reporting of results would go through a formal Cabinet meeting. That's everything from me. Happy to take any questions.
Doesn't appear so. Okay, so on that basis, I'm happy to propose that the content of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee resolution be noted. Do I have a seconder on that?
A second.
Thank you, Councillor Bryant. All those in favour?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're skipping the call to accounts item for now, and I'll come back to it later. So I'm moving on to the empty home strategy, which is item 12 on the agenda, and Councillor Sean Prendergast is here to present.
Thank you, Chair. The report itself is quite self-explanatory, but I'll just give a brief overview of why this strategy is particularly important for the district. Obviously, it will feed into our housing strategy as we move forward. Empty homes form a key part of helping meet that housing need. They're a wasted resource and are also often the subject of complaints from communities, with some empty homes being run down and dilapidated. This will give us an opportunity to hopefully bring the vast majority of them back into use, and they can help also boost the local economy, which is an added bonus. As outlined in significant detail within the report and the company strategy, this strategy is important for addressing shortages, revitalising our communities and stimulating the local economy and promoting environmental sustainability. The whole approach of this strategy is pitched as a collaborative nudge in the initial stages, which will hopefully spark owners into action. And obviously, if that doesn't work, we do have more robust steps that we can take where appropriate. That's just a brief overview for you, Chair.
Thank you. Before we go into the debate, is there any questions for Councillor Prendergast? Councillor Munzer.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions, as is usually the case in these things. The first is, I would like to ask, how has this strategy been developed? Could you sort of give us a little bit of background as to, you know, what have we been looking at? Have we been looking at guidance from other local authorities?
Thank you, Councillor Munzer. The answer is yes. Most local authorities do have empty home strategies for the very reasons that I outlined in my summary introducing the report. So we have taken that into account. The numbers of empty homes that are significant and that would meet the aims of the strategy are increasing. So it is becoming more and more of a problem, and we really do need to try and get a grip of it, hence the strategy.
Thank you for that. I was just wondering, would you be able to give the committee a little bit more detail as to actually what council has been doing without the strategy in place? Because it looks like there are an awful lot of legislative provisions which the council already has, regardless of whether or not this strategy is in place, to, you know, ultimately get to the same outcome.
Yes, well, there isn't particular legislation that forces, for want of a better word, councils to adapt an empty home strategy. At this current moment, we do heavily rely on our council tax records, which is not particularly sustainable or helpful if we are going to bring the vast majority of these properties back into use. Hence this significant strategy. So with having an officer in post, it will allow us to take that approach, which is clearly outlined within the reported documents, to make sure that we can have these properties back into use and that they aren't a blight on our communities.
Forgive me. I understand. I've read the report as to sort of, how do we measure empty homes, and obviously the best way to do that is through council tax, etc. But focusing specifically on enforcement and what this council does in terms of enforcement, could you give us a little bit more detail as to sort of, what this council already does enforcement wise to try and, reduce the number of empty homes, and under what legislative provisions?
I think it's probably best for Frank or one of the team to answer that in terms of the enforcement strategies that we take.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to respond on that point. There is no legal requirement to have an empty home strategy or to respond to any specific legislation to address empty homes. Clearly, the necessity to respond is subject to the local numbers, the impact they have, etc. But to answer your targeted question on what current levels of enforcement we do to deal with empty homes, the target is to prevent them being a nuisance and annoyance of negative impact to the local community. Certainly from within my service in environmental health, where when those empty homes are considered in such a state as to pose a statutory nuisance to a neighbouring a property, then subject to what that nuisance may be, we can require or seek the owner to undertake the necessary works to mitigate that statutory nuisance. Within that, there is also some legislative provisions within planning legislation to require the owners of the property to prevent them being essentially less of an eyesore or less of a negative impact. Much beyond that, there isn't significant amount we can do. Antisocial behaviour does allow the regulators, ourselves and police, to cause them to stop being a venue where antisocial behaviour could take place. But all of those activities are reactive on the essentially illegal or illicit use the property is being put. None of those measures actually help to address the empty homes point per se. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The report obviously notes that there are going to be issues as to resourcing. We've got the funding in place for a 0.5 officer to deal with empty homes. But if you actually want to go and do any of the enforcement actions, for example, a compulsory purchase, heavens forbid, there's no money in the budget, is there? So what are you going to do to actually ensure that this isn't, just an empty strategy of which isn't worth really the paper it's written on? And it's actually going to have a difference in the district in North Herts, either Councillor Prendergast or the officers.
Frank, you're happy? Sorry, Councillor Prendergast.
So, in answer to Councillor Mutt's, in fact, I would imagine all empty home strategies throughout the country will have strategies in place such as this to bring their properties back into use. The reality is the vast majority of these people are going to be able to get these properties back into use with this soft nudge approach that we intend to take. And that is hence the resource that we need to do that. That is going to be absolutely vital in making sure that we get these properties back to use so that we can meet the housing needs of our local residents. In relation to the enforcement, it's not going to be something we would do lightly. We would explore all possible opportunities to work with people before getting to that point. And if we do have to get to that point, then we can certainly cross that bridge when we come to it. But that is not the main theme of the strategy, as you'll see in the report.
Okay, final question for now.
Yeah, one final question. I do have concerns about where the money's going to come from if you are going to do enforcement, but we'll put that aside for 1 minute. How do we measure success? At the end of this strategy, once it sort of goes to the end of its lifespan, what would we like to see? What is a measurable outcome that this council can see? And we can come back in, 4 years' time and say, you know what, that strategy, it worked well, it was successful.
Thank you. Bringing more properties back into use. We've set targets in the report, and I think they're targets that can be reviewed and be made more ambitious as we move forward, based on resources. But ultimately, the main aim of the report is to bring more properties back into use.
Thank you, Councillor Prendergast. I had Councillor Levitt next, and then Councillor Daniel Wright Mason after Councillor Levitt.
Thank you. I'm sort of following on from Ralph's bits here on the enforcement and resourcing. On the enforcement, there's a number of properties, I know with 3 within about 200 metres of here that are subject to probate, which have been taking a long time to go through. I know one of them's been empty for at least 4 years and probate's still going on that one. And also a couple of absent owners or unknown owners. I'm assuming that you won't waste resources trying to chase those ones up because there's not a lot you can do about them. And I think you said you go on the ones that are deteriorating and creating social nuisance. So is that one way of directing your resources? And going back on the resources bit, page 18 in the report, 15.1, as Ralph mentions, says there's funding in place for half-time post. But when you look at the actual strategy on page 39, which is, have I got the right page there? Yeah, page 39, resourcing the strategy, saying there is currently no dedicated resource while funding is in place, appointing us as yet to be achieved, and it's hoped this start can be delivered. That gives me some little concern. And really want to know is how well is that going? And is there any alternative if you can't recruit to that post?
Frank, I'll probably pass
without being able to do it. There's not a lot of point in having a strategy.
Thank you. Happy to answer those points. Certainly on the enforcement side of it, if I can just clarify, the enforcement isn't to seek the removal or the reoccupation of the empty home. As I said before, there is no legislation requiring an empty home to be reoccupied. The enforcement is to act against when those empty properties are posing a breach of other legislation, so breach of planning or statutory nuisance or similar. And for those activities, we have, certainly within the environmental health team, we have officers in place. So that is in addition to the 0.5 specifically for the empty home strategy. Regarding the properties which we will target, absolutely, there are a number of reasons why people choose to have or allow their properties to be empty. Those properties which we identify as being, as you mentioned, in probate or vacant for any other legal reasons, then clearly we still list them. The figures that are presented are taken from the council tax register, so that we will record those and we will attempt to liaise with the owners periodically just to get a status check. There are likely to be many others which are far more easier to resolve than trying to work with owners to resolve probate. Believe you me, I fully understand how that can be a drain. Clearly, the approach that we are intended to take is to, as Councillor Prendergast mentioned, essentially informally liaise with and discuss with the owners as to identify and highlight the options that are potentially available to those. It will ultimately be up to the owners as to what they choose to do with them. We will just constantly try to remind them of the options that are available. Hope that answers the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Councillor Daniel Wright Mason.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a plan to do specific communication or promotion to residents about the strategy, or if it's mostly going to be like an internal mechanism.
Yes, is the answer. We do intend to publish and advertise the strategy community-wide. One of the main reasons for that is people need to be aware that the strategy is in place, and so we can get useful intelligence, so people make sure that they do report any empty homes directly to us, so then we can take the appropriate action.
Thank you, Councillor Prendergast. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's an excellent piece of work, the strategy. I think it's really, really good. On
page 15 of the strategy, there's a table which shows the number of empty homes for 2 years or more is basically double or more doubled in the last 10 years. Is North Herts unique in that respect, or is that a pattern that's kind of replicated locally?
Frank, I imagine you've probably got more information than others.
Thank you, Chair. The figures that we've got, to be honest, we don't have a total regional or national figures on the number of empty homes. It's highly likely to be more prevalent, both as a number and as a percentage in the more urbanised areas than certainly in the rural areas, and especially where we tend to have residents who remain in their properties for substantially longer than many other areas where there's a more transitory population. Certainly the numbers that we have, the numbers that I have access to immediately are only those from 2022, 2023. They show that the properties which have been emptied for 2 years or more to be fairly consistent. The figures we've obtained from council tax do indicate a substantive increase post-COVID. We could obviously extract figures from previous prior to that. I don't think it really helps as far as going forward, but certainly where it looks, the numbers we have got are around about the same percentage-wise on more rural districts. I don't know if that's a bit of a round the houses way to say we appear to be common with many others, but I wouldn't guarantee it. Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I was going to just on the COVID effects you mentioned. Would you expect those numbers to come down again now that COVID subsided? Or
I think, to be honest, I think COVID figures did have a big impact for many foreseeable reasons. I think probably what's going to have more of an impact is the economic status of the country and the region per se. Clearly, having a vacant, empty home in your possession is a financial draw. As to whether or not the homeowners wish to, reoccupy that, it's something which, I mean, to me, it makes sense to do so. But as was mentioned previously, there are very many reasons why homes are kept vacant. We appear to have around about 10% of our total number of empty homes, which are classed as long-term, more than 2 years. The vast majority of our numbers, which is around about 1,500 at any one time, are those which are in the process of being sold. And obviously with the sale process, there is a period when many empty homes are vacant, some for more than just the one day of the sale transfer, but some for weeks and months onwards. That's the vast majority of our empty homes, which, that does promote and continue the local economy in the home exchange, home sale process. Thank you.
Another follow-up?
Yeah, just on a different section of the report. Thank you though for that. On page 30, it talks about an allocated staffing resource for half full-time equivalent resource, and then some potential targets for year 1, year 2, year 3. I was wondering how you landed on the half resource, and is that kind of the optimal resource that you would want to have, or because the targets seem quite modest in relation to the size of the problem?
Well, I was having this conversation previous. Ideally, we'd love substantially more than 0.5 FTE. It's a resource that has been allocated and is agreed as a growth bid previous years. We are yet to fill it, and to answer the previous question, we are certainly hoping to have that post filled very early part of next year, April, May, subject to advertising and employing the most appropriate candidate. So we're hoping to get the post filled as soon as we can. As far as the numbers, it's going to be an early process for us. It's a completely new dedicated process as far as the council is concerned. So there will inevitably be a lag phase of we have yet to introduce that targeted approach to the homeowners. We're hoping that we'd love to get an early win on a fair number of them and exceed the targets that we've put forward. As Councillor Prendergast said, we will clearly review the input that we put into this exercise and review the outcome that we get from them, with the objective that we will get as many as we can, many empty homes reoccupied as we can. We'll review those and publicise those figures as we progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I think a lot of the questions I had have been fairly well answered so far, and most questions have been asked, as I said. I had one question around quality homes. Funnily enough, it was brought up earlier in Settle, and a failed quality home, or indeed homes that don't meet EPC 3 in about 4 years' time, will not legally be allowed to be rented out. Given that EPC C and houses generally require a fair bit of renovation over the years, I imagine that most of the long-term houses in about 4 years' time will not be EPC C, so wouldn't really be able to be rented out on the private market by the landlords. Have we sort of got a strategy in place to see what we can do to offer financial support to those owners to actually maybe pay for that work themselves and get some money back from it that way? Because otherwise I have a horrible feeling we'll spend lots of money having a compulsive purchase and then have to spend that money again to redo it. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. One of the tasks of the post will be not only to liaise and communicate with the homeowners, but it's also to look at see what funding is potentially available. There are, incidental to the empty homes approach, there's a substantive amount of money that's available to homeowners. Doesn't include empty homes in this category, but potential alternative is to see what funding will be available, is available to raise to bring the standards of houses which are below Cat C up to that level for rental. Certainly other more well-established empty homes activities in other local authorities around the country are also tackling this same issue. There is substantive funding which can be available and is accessible. We clearly haven't looked into that as of yet. We haven't got the post to fill it. We haven't got the task to actually instigate the remedial works. But it's certainly a point that's been raised at the regional areas across the country. I was at an empty home. I was at a eco energy efficiency conference a little while ago, and part of that conversation was that very point regarding how do they deal with empty homes. So we don't have the answer. It's certainly an answer which is available and which the officer appointed to the post will look towards to address and resolve going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Councillor Munster.
Thank you. I do just have two questions, having reread a number of the documents. On page 50, page 30 of the proposed strategy, in number 8.6, we're talking about targets. It says that effectively a reasonable target would be 1 property per year. Then it sort of goes and follows on, and it says it could be increased to 3 in year 1, 6 in year 2, 8 thereafter. So it seems like we don't have a clear target focus. Is it 1? Is it 3? So would you be able to provide a little bit more detail as to actually sort of, what that target is in year 1, 2, 3, 4? So we have a measurable outcome to say, look, we've been successful or we failed on this.
Certainly, the lesser target is what we hope to achieve with our 0.5 FTE. Certainly, with additional resources towards that, then we obviously hope to achieve a higher figure. But certainly, as I mentioned before, this isn't a targeted approach that we have followed previously. So there will inevitably be a lag phase in starting to identify, liaise with the homeowners, and then working with those who are willing to arrange or allow for their properties to be reoccupied. That process can take a substantive period of time. It clearly depends on each individual case as to what that time will be. And also what those homeowners wish to do with the property. It could be as relatively straightforward as a sale of the property to another homeowner for occupancy there and then, or it could be for alternatives, including making available to social landlords for rental. All of those processes will take time. And as I said, essentially, it is an aspirational figure, I'll be perfectly honest. If we can achieve 1 in the first year, increasing to 3, 5 in subsequent years, great. If we are very successful and we achieve, 2, 3, 4 in the first year, will it be even better? Clearly, we don't know the intentions of the homeowners, we certainly will work towards getting as many of these properties occupied as we can. Thank you.
I think you had another question to you, Councillor Munsell.
I'm looking now at page 36 of the agenda, which is page 16 of the strategy, and table number 3, which is looking at the length of time vacant. It seems that, take, for example, 2022, we had 124 properties, of which were empty between the period of 2 and 5 years. That then goes down by 101 to the sort of the 5-10 year mark. Should we not be focusing more on actually sort of, a starting point of the strategy actually being implemented from 5 years onwards, as opposed to actually, 2 years onwards? I'm just thinking we're obviously limited in our resource of what we're able to do. It seems a little bit more focus should be placed on those more longer term 5 to 10 year properties, if you see where I'm coming from.
I think certainly the idea that we're approaching is we will liaise and contact all of the longer term home owners, those at 2 years and above. We are working with 140, 150 properties per se. And as was mentioned earlier on, there are some which have been in that longer term process, 4 years and more because of legal reason, like probate, as was mentioned. Clearly, in those scenarios, those properties which are longer term, 5 years and more, there are some very entrenched reasons as to why those properties will not, or probably will not, and certainly have not thus far been reoccupied. Certainly, I know of a couple where there is absolutely no intention by the homeowner to reoccupy the property. They're not financially able to do so. Now, it might be just merely a case they are unaware, or there are other reasons, emotional reasons, family reasons, legal reasons why they choose not to be. It's potentially going to be those longer term properties which are going to be far harder to reoccupy, simply because the reasoning why they have been vacant for that long is far more entrenched, whereas potentially those properties which are 2 to 5 years, there's more of those, so potentially we can identify more homeowners willing to move those. But also the idea that the reasoning why they are still long-term vacant may not be quite so entrenched. We will target all the owners, and we'll get the answers that we get. Fingers crossed, as I said before, we will get more properties in towards occupancy. We'll see if my perception is correct, but we'll happily review those on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Prendergast wanted to come in there as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add to some of what Frank was saying, just going back on Councillor Muntz's questions. Thank you for that. So what I would say is it's really important to set achievable targets based on the resources available, and that can be a movable feast. One of the reasons why we have the targets as they are is we need to fully understand why these properties are empty and the reasons behind it. And that's what we're lacking at the moment. So until we get those reasons, it's going to be very difficult to set absolutely firm targets, hence the strategy before you. But also looking at the statistics, what I would say, just to come back on that, is the more worrying trend is the 2 to 5 years. The 5 to 10 over 10 is relatively stable, whereas actually the 2 to 5 is increasing quite dramatically. And maybe our focus actually needs to be on the whole and taking a holistic approach, particularly when you look at those statistics.
Thank you. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. The one thing I just want to clear up a little bit is in 10.5 in the report on page 17. Currently, for every house brought into occupancy, the council receives a new homes bonus, which, although restricted in what it is can be committed to, does allow the council to offset some of its costs. This bonus is likely to be removed entirely, though it is rumoured an alternative new home incentive may replace this, but that may exclude long-term empty homes being brought back into occupancy and provision. I wasn't aware, and I couldn't find it anywhere in the bits about new homes bonus, that bringing empty homes into use does actually qualify for new homes bonus at the moment. I don't believe it does it?
Frank?
Thank you, Chair. Certainly it does at the moment, although as the report says, it is a scheme bonus which has been highlighted. It may be ending fairly soon. I don't know what the amounts are. But certainly at the moment, a empty property being brought back in to occupancy is still classified as a new home.
So having this strategy then would give an understanding to the statistics we already have about the number of homes. So the reasoning behind, what I'm trying to say is this, if there is conditions behind that new homes bonus being met, then you would need to give the reasons for it. And this strategy, by bringing that background information in, would give you that ability to go for that new homes bonus, would it?
Certainly the presence or the amount of the new homes bonus and the criteria that qualifies would be, it is an aspect of it. The financial reward of that part of the bringing empty homes into reoccupancy isn't the main reason for the strategy. The strategy is to highlight the intention of having fewer empty homes sitting in our districts, and accordingly, clearly we can identify the financial status of that empty home strategy, the amount that it does provide. My colleagues in the council tax team would be able to give the far more accurate answer than I can. We can certainly include that into comments or addendums to the report if it would be useful. But as I said, essentially the criteria from a service delivery point is the reduction in the number of properties per se, especially if that new homes bonus is likely to be reduced or eliminated in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Are there any other questions? No. Okay, just one last thing from me, and I was just curious if and obviously the strategy it's not ironed out with the exact ways of working, but it might be useful to and this is going back to the EPC ratings, get those EPC ratings as you're looking into properties, so you could actually have a look at the houses that are worth chasing as well. Another way to sort of shortlist it, if you've got a EPC rating G or it's close to derelict, do you really want to be putting lots of staff time when there's only half an FTE in there? So just a thought on that one. It might be a useful time to gather that data. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly, as incidental to the empty homes, we are due to undertake a housing condition survey of it'll be an IT version, a desktop exercise rather than a door knocking process. But certainly part of that will be to review the quantity statistically numbers of each property under each EPC rating. So that will feed into the information we have about the empty homes. But certainly one of the criteria we will look at will be that assessment as to the viability of approaching the owners accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Frank. I should have known you'd already thought of that. Okay, I can't see any more questions. So I'll go on to the recommendations then. So the recommendations, and there's two, that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee recommends to Cabinet that the Cabinet adopt the Empty Home Strategy 2024 to 29. That's the first point. Second point is that Cabinet should note that although there is no legal requirement for the Council to have an empty home strategy, there have been several significant government-focused documents and papers highlighting their importance, including a House of Commons briefing paper stating that each local authority should have such a strategy to help reduce the number of long-term empty homes in their districts. Is everyone quite comfortable with those two recommendations? The wording thereof. Okay. So can I have a proposer for that, please? Councillor Barnes, thank you. And do we have a seconder? Councillor Billing, thank you. Okay, so if we take that to the vote. Oh, sorry, good point. Debate. Thank you, James. Councillor Munster.
Thank you. I think I just want to start off by saying that a House of Commons briefing paper has no legislative or statutory standing whatsoever. It is not a green paper, it is not a white paper, it is a document of which is produced by the House of Commons Library for the consumption of members of the House of Commons and for any individuals of whom are concerned or interested in the issues of which are being debated. So I thought I just ought to highlight that. But I'm in two minds about this strategy because I support what this strategy seeks to do, increasing the housing stock locally and tackling the issues associated with empty homes. But there are a number of different issues of which we've alluded to this evening, of which this strategy contains, because as the report alludes to, short-term homes in Hertfordshire within 0 to empty homes in Hertfordshire within 0 to 2 years are, they are back in use. And therefore, the drive and the focus of the strategy, I don't think, should necessarily be focused on those sort of homes of which are 6 months to 2 years, but they should be focused 2 years above, as we've already discussed. And I understand that there are various entrenched reasons for that. And it seems to me that there isn't actually anything new in this policy, to be brutally honest with you. It seems to be more of a consolidation of what this council already has and the legislative powers this council already has. And that brings with it a number of different issues, particularly when we're talking about enforcement, because yes, we're going to be seeing an officer on a part-time contract dedicated to this, but that's really all there is when we're talking about enforcement, unless we're then going to go into the environmental health budget and say, well, we're going to have to take money away from, I don't know, enforcing something else, sort of a fly tipping investigation in order to pay for a compulsory purchase of an empty home in North Hertfordshire. You're going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul almost. And then obviously it goes to more of a fundamental issue because, if I have a second home and I do not want that to be filled, I don't know why that would be. There are, as we've said, a number of reasons, but personally, I would want to get that on the market and into the rental market and have another stream of income. But it is my right as an individual in this country, to have a property sitting empty and vacant. So the talk about compulsory purchase, compulsory acquisition, we've got to remember that this is a serious invasion of proprietary rights of an individual. And these aren't terms that just can be bandied about. We need to actually just bear in mind that it is a serious invasion of an individual's right. So I hope this strategy is actually going to make a difference in the district. I sincerely do, but unless it's actually supported with any additional funding, as I referred to in my earlier comments, that I do fear that it is not going to be worth the paper it is written on, unless we're able to actually follow up with some action.
Thank you, Councillor Munster. Councillor Barnes.
Yeah, I don't think that the compulsory purchase is really a big issue in this strategy. It seems to me like the voluntary way forward to renovation reoccupation as preferred option is quite a strong statement. I think it is incumbent on us to try and do something about this problem in the district, because it affects a lot of areas clearly, and there are a lot of people who would benefit from having these houses available. So I think that's what I have to say on that.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you. While following on Councillor Munster's sentiments, I support the aims behind this strategy and everything. I have my doubts as to whether we'll have the resource to actually do anything with it. And we're actually talking really about a handful of homes being brought back into occupancy, even by the numbers in the table. We're talking about very small numbers of homes out of the total being brought back into occupancy. I'm just wondering the amount of resource we put into it, and I'd just advise caution that the amount of resource we put into it for the reward could be but better elsewhere into getting other bits of land developed and stuff like that, rather than sort of flogging a dead horse, as it were. I will support it, but I do have my doubts as to its effectiveness.
Thank you, Councillor Levitt. Is there anyone else wishing to say anything? Okay, in which case we will move to the vote.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 13 on the agenda, which is the council tax premiums on empty properties and second home premiums. Councillor Ian Albert is here to present.
Cheers, thanks, Chair. And as always, obviously got my officer colleagues, Joe Duffy and Geraldine Goodwin here as well. And obviously to thank them and the teams for all the work that's been done on this paper. The paper complements and provides some tools in respect of the strategy paper we discussed earlier. A report proposes some changes to council tax premiums on empty and second homes, and this follows the government's updated legislation in relation to this. There are two aspects to consider: empty homes and second homes. Now, legislation previously enabled local authorities to introduce a council tax premium on the length of time a property has been empty. Now, premiums are paid in addition to the 100% council tax liability. The options were around properties empty for two years but less than 5 can receive 100% premium, properties empty for 5 years but less than 10, a 200% premium, and properties empty for more than 10 years, a 300% premium. Now, in 2019, the council considered the premiums above and opted to introduce the current 100% premium for properties empty more than 2 years. From April 2020. The recent change in legislation allows us to apply a premium on homes that have been empty for more than 1 year. The report says we carried out some analysis in December, reported there were 157 properties that have been empty for over 2 years. Of these, 121 are regularly paying 200% council tax, which equates to approximately 292,000 split across the major preceptors. 7 have not had the premium applied using our discretions are available, and 29 are not currently paying regularly. Despite this, a number of empty homes continues to rise and brings a number of challenges to the district. An empty home strategy has also been considered this evening, and this sets out plans to tackle the issues more widely. But this paper specifically now relates to our ability to increase council tax premiums to encourage empty homes to be brought back into occupation. The rise of empty homes and second homes is a national challenge, and inconsistencies within legislation have been identified, whereby a premium can be avoided by the owner furnishing an empty home, which turns it into a second home, which currently has a maximum charge of 100% and no premium. At North Herts at the moment, we are also giving a 10% discount on second homes. So that is something we are looking to see whether we can alter more quickly. Government has introduced sections within the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act to address these inconsistencies, and our recommendations 2.1.1 to 2.1.3 reflect those changes. The paper sets out what a number of other local authorities do, like Welling Hatfield, Hartsmere, Central Beds, Dacorum, for example, and a number of those are already taking advantage of the earlier changes to legislation. Now, the only change we are formally changing that we will actually change from the 1st of April 24, if this paper is agreed, will affecting properties empty over 5 years only. And this will impact 43 properties, and we'll immediately write to those property owners to make them aware of this change. Changes to premium on empty homes can be effective from the 1st of April 24, but premiums on second homes can only be implemented from the 1st of April next year, 2025, as 1 year's notice is required. The expected impact of additional premiums is that homeowners will be encouraged to bring empty properties into use and revert the use of second homes to primary residences, which supports the aims of the empty home strategy. The policy will be finalised once all the exceptions have been confirmed by government. We expect this to include properties undergoing probate, properties being actively marketed for sale or rent, properties undergoing major repairs, annexes forming part of the main dwelling, job-related dwellings, seasonal homes where year-round or permanent occupation is prohibited. So they've got the recommendations in front of you here. I would commend the paper to you, and I don't often commend Michael Gove, but I did commend this on this one occasion where I was struck by a quote from him where he said about these changes were about actually delivering more people having access to local homes at affordable prices. I believe that this strategy, this paper that we've presented here, will help to do that. I commend it to the committee, and obviously, hopefully, that we'll obviously commend it to Cabinet later on.
Thank you, Councillor Albert. I do have one question, and it's it might be sort of playing devil's advocate here, but on one hand, the last paper that we've just just voted on and approved was talking about getting people into homes, getting rid of empty homes. Completely agree with you. That's a brilliant thing to do. During your speech there, you were talking about trying to reduce the number of second homes or get people to turn them into their main homes. I think my question for you is, by introducing the premium, is it not potential that for second homes, that is it not sort of likely that what people are just going to do is swap houses every 6 months and then essentially have their first home in the borough or the district at some point, but then what that's not necessarily going to fix is the empty home situation. It's just going to make people flip-flop. Would it not be potentially better to have the second home premium reduced so that they could be rented out at some point? Because if they're paying all the work to get the houses done, or they're paying an extra premium, they're not going to afford to get those houses repaired and up to standard for rental. I hope that made sense.
Yes, I think so. I think I understand. I mean, I think part of the question I think here is, and I think, you know, I'm sure government have had the same questions when introducing the legislation, is about how you drive, you know, behavioural change and so on. You know, as I think as we know that any time when you're looking at second homes and looking at main homes, these are sometimes complex issues, which often can resolve different relationships and different people, where people have different relations in living in different places and so on. So I think that this is probably an early stage to look to see what the behavioural change might be. I think it's a fair challenge, but I think, you know, my view is the number. Yes, there might be, as always with any system, some people try and look for a loophole in it, but I think in principle what we've got here feels right and feels fair, and I think that's what's important.
Thank you. Councillor Munster.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Albert I assume he is going to be far more knowledgeable when it comes to matters of council tax than myself. So I would just ask him. So if, for example, I have a Band D property in Hitchin, which currently the council tax rate is £1,775.50. And then I have a second property, which is also a Band D in Hitchin. Would I be paying £1,775.50 on that property currently? So that then my total tax bill for those two properties would be £3,551. I'm just trying to work out the current situation, and then actually sort of what the cost implication, if we like, would be once if this policy is implemented.
I think there is a subsidy of some description, but Councillor Albert will.
Yeah. So at the moment, effectively, and I say, obviously, my colleagues, either Joe or Jerry, will correct me if I'm wrong, is that you will have on the second home, you will have a 10% discount on that. That's as part of that's the subsidy I think we should be looking to change. The further question comes back to what we can do from the 1st of April 2025, which is part of the recommendation in this paper. But as I say, at the moment, you would have on your two properties, you would have you'd pay the full amounts, but on the second one, there is a 10% discount.
Sorry, Councillor Munson, you had a follow up?
Yes. Yeah. So could I just check that if you had, say, for example, in recommendation 2.1.1, it says from the 1st of April 2025, council adopts the following premium levy rate. So if you have an empty home or second home that is empty for 5 years, but not less than 10, you would be paying, based on the current council tax rate for a Band D in Hitchin, £3,551 on that single property.
I think you're covering two different issues here now. Because are we talking about second homes or empty homes? Because these aren't the same. These aren't the same. These aren't the same things from that point of view. And this, I think, is so you shouldn't conflate two different issues.
Forgive me. So looking then at recommendation 2.2 and 100% premium. So based on that, I would be paying on my second home £3,551 minus whatever the 10% discount is. With the
on the
premium.
second home, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, that clarifies it. And then just could I ask, looking at that same recommendation, we are told that regulations will be brought forward by the service director customers. When are we going to be able to see those? When are those going to be brought forward? Because I feel quite uncomfortable, recommending to cabinet something of which actually I haven't had sight of.
Chair, can I bring another sort of probably Joe or Geraldine, because I'll know when I think the likely timeline. I don't think we know the answer to that yet, but what the likely timeline of getting the detailed regulations, because we're waiting for government information. But perhaps I think Joe or Jerry could cover that.
Yeah, that's correct. We are waiting for the detail to be finalised. As it stands, we have got a draft policy, and my apologies because I did mean to upload that along with this document. I can certainly circulate it via James to the committee. However, it is draft, and we are waiting for the finer detail to come through on those exceptions and everything before it can be finalised.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, does that clarify, Ralph? Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, technical clarification, if somebody could help me with it, please. Two actually. Second, being classed as a second home, does it have to be in the primary residence have to be in the district, or could the primary residence be elsewhere, and the secondary home is in the district? And how do you monitor that sort of thing? And the other one is, when does a second home become an empty home? Because if somebody is primarily living abroad or in another part of the country and only comes back for, say, 2 or 3 days in a month, does that then make it an empty home, or is it still a second home?
I'm going to pass that over to Geraldine Goodwin. That's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Good evening. There are a couple of things there. If a property is a second home, deemed a second home, it's generally furnished and it would not be classed as their main home. So their main home, it's in legislation, it's very difficult from a council tax perspective to talk about someone's main and someone's sole home. Often we end up in a valuation tribunal with them because trying to determine which is a main home and which is a sole home are two very different things. So from a main home perspective, if you're working abroad and you would come home 2 or 3 times a week just to come back to that property, that would be deemed as your main home. It's the home that you return to where you've got the most ties and probably the most significant material interest. So that would be classed as your main home. A second home is generally a furnished home that isn't in occupation all of the time. And in answer to your other question, Councillor Levitt, yes, you can have a main property in one district and a second home in another, and we would liaise with the neighbouring authority or not neighbouring authority in some instances on that situation. Does that answer that?
I think so. Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick procedural question. Having already been consulted as listed under 5.1 as the Deputy Executive Member for Finance and IT, where do I stand in terms of debate and vote on this? Am I okay to do that or not?
Do you have a material interest in?
No.
I'm quite comfortable personally, but Jeanette is in the back of the room, fortunately. So
I think just in this case, obviously you're a deputy executive member, so you don't have the rights of an executive member. So yeah, you're not on the cabinet formally, hence why you can sit on overview and scrutiny committee.
Okay, any more questions? No, in which case I will move to the recommendations. I'm going to take these as a 2. So I'm going to take the recommendation 2.1, 2.11 and 2.12. and then I'll separate that from 2.2 predominantly so everyone knows what we're actually saying when we're going through this, and because obviously there is some dates there at 2025. So the recommendation is that Overview and Scrutiny recommends to Cabinet that, in accordance with Section 11B and 11C of the Local Government Finance Act 1992, as amended by Section 2 of the Rating (Property in Common Occupation and Council Tax Empty Dwellings Act 2018 and the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023, Cabinet considers increasing the council tax premiums on empty homes and introducing a new premium on second homes in a phased approach as follows. So 2.1.1, that from April 1st, 2025, the council adopts the following full premium levy rates. Properties empty for 1 year but less than 5 years will receive 100% premium. Properties empty for 5 years but less than 10 years, a 200% premium. And properties empty for more than 10 years, a 300% premium. 2.1.2, that from the 1st of April 2024 until the 31st of March 2025, the following interim premiums are introduced. Properties empty for more than 1 year but less than 2 will not receive a premium. Properties empty for more than 2 years but less than 5 years will receive 100% premium. Properties empty for 5 years but less than 10 years are 150% premium. And properties empty for more than 10 years are 200% premium. Is everyone quite comfortable with that recommendation? Right, or how I worded it? Okay, so we'll move on to the debate for that one, and then we'll come back for the second one. Sorry? Oh, we do need a proposer, sorry. Yes, do we have a proposer? Councillor Mason, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Denham, thank you. Debenham, it's getting very late, sorry. Okay, I'll move on to the debate. Okay, no debate. Okay, then I'll move that to a vote then.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. And I'll move on to the second recommendation, that from 1st of April 2025, a 100% premium is levied on all the properties that are determined as a second home, subject to any exceptions, once these have been confirmed by regulations, and that the service director, customers, is in consultation with the executive member for finance and IT, is delegated authority to make any amendments following further confirmation of regulations. Do I have a proposer for that? Thank you, Councillor Wright Mason. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Was there a debate on this? Shall we? Oh, Councillor Munster.
Thank you. I will just say something. I want it noted on the record that I feel very, very uncomfortable with this recommendation without actually having sight of the proposed recommendations and regulations. And I think that they should have been circulated to members before this committee so that we would have enough time to actually go over them and then scrutinise them accordingly. But that is my objection to this.
Thank you, Councillor Munster. I must say it's normal that we would receive it. So I do share your concerns on that particular point. Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, pretty much what Ralph said, but also the premiums. The second home issue is mainly aimed at places like Cornwall, Devon, places like that, where it's taking a lot of homes out of the housing market. I don't think we have such a huge problem around this area with that. And I think it's quite unnecessary action. And again, without seeing the regulations, I can't really support something I don't know what I'm actually voting for.
Thank you, Councillor Levitt. Any other comments? No? Okay, so we'll move that to the vote as well then.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, we're moving now on to item number 14 of the agenda. Thank you very much for the officers that have presented, and please feel free to leave. So it's number 14, Regulation of Investigatory Powers, or RIPA, Annual Review. Jeanette Thompson to present.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm very grateful that you brought this forward because I didn't want to say good morning to everyone, as Councillor Munster did the other night, and I'm sure you don't either. You'll recall that this is one of the annual functions that you undertake. So you look at effectively review the procedures that we have in place to deal with the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. Potentially you look to see whether we need to make any changes to our policy and procedures. And this, as you will see from the report, covers the sorts of powers that we can exercise to deal with things like directed surveillance, covert human intelligence sources, and communications data. Sorry, have I finished? I have to finish now, right? Okay, that's it then. So yes, we have to have those procedures in place, and we have a number of internal monitoring procedures, audits, as well as we are inspected about every 3 years by the Investigatory Power Commissioner's Office. Over the last few years, they have honed down, if you like, their processes for how they inspect authorities that are, I suppose, in their viewpoints, and we are one of them, essentially at low risk because we don't really use those powers that much. So we certainly don't and haven't used directed surveillance or the CHIS powers since at least over 10 years. And on occasions, we do use the communications data process, which is described in slightly more detail within the actual report. All of those can be used as part of tools as part of your investigations, the regulatory investigations that we undertake. And you will see that last year we were inspected by the IPCO in terms of inspected, as I say, with this new sort of risk-based system. They will send a questionnaire, we'll go through, and we have to provide information and evidence to support whatever we're saying that we're doing. And they were happy that they didn't need to come in and actually physically inspect any of our documentation or do anything further in that. And you'll see that there's an assurance letter that's been provided at Appendix A, which supports that. For those various reasons, including the fact that there hasn't, although there is some legislation going through the House of Lords at the current time, there isn't anything that we need to do following their inspection effectively. They haven't recommended anything other than keep doing what we're doing. And we'll obviously keep a review of the procedures in the light of the bill that's going through the Lords at the moment, and see if there's anything we need to update following that later on down the year, if indeed that's appropriate. So I am happy to answer any questions from the body of the report if you wish, Chair. Over to you.
Thank you, Jeanette. So I should have put that there was a supplementary document published earlier today, just including the RIPA policy and procedures, which weren't originally in the papers, just in case anyone missed that. Are there any questions? No. Okay. Well, in which case I'll take that to the recommendations. Thank you, Jeanette. And possibly speak something in the debate. But the recommendation is that the content of the report and the IPCO's assurance letter in Appendix A be noted by Cabinet. I'm happy to propose this. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Munster, thank you. So if we could take that to the vote, please. I'm assuming there's no debate.
Yeah, that motion is carried.
By committee, by the way, but not cabinet.
Oh,
just making sure that was. Sure, make a note of this.
Did say cabinet in the report. Dear, oh dear. Right. There we go. That'll be noted by cabinet. Good point. Okay. So we'll move back now to item number 11 on the agenda, which is the call to the count, Lord Lister Hotel Chair's report. So there's a supplementary document was published earlier today containing the specific minutes of the meeting of 28th of September 2023, as well as the call to account cover report, which includes the lessons learned at point 4. I'm going to pass you over now to the previous chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee from last financial year, David Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep this brief. You've all got the report in front of you and hopefully the supplement which came out, which was extracts from the minutes and the lessons learned and everything like that on there. I think most of what I wanted to say was actually in the lessons learned. It came down to a weighing up of community interest against urgency. I think what lesson was learnt was it possibly wasn't as urgent as it appeared at first. We first knew about this in February 2021, but then we had a deadline of we were given a deadline of 31st of August for completion of the purchase by Key Stage. I think with hindsight, and it does say so in the lessons learned, it could have possibly come to Cabinet as an urgent item or other ways around it. Again, also in lessons learned is the level of public engagement and letting people know in advance, knowing this was quite a controversial issue. We were somewhat limited at the time because there was a planning thing going through on it, but I'm happy to take any questions on the report now.
Thank you, Councillor Levitt. Any questions? Councillor Bryant.
Thank you, Councillor Levitt, for your report. Can I just clarify that the recommendations and lessons learned in the minutes of September 2022, they were actually produced by, based on what was said by Anthony Roach, Elizabeth Dennis and Martin Lawrence?
No, the lessons learned were actually presented at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee as part of the report.
I think you're saying the same things here. So the recommendations came as part of the report. They're not written by David. That's what you're asking,
Yes.
Councillor Bryant. Yes.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
So they're straight from the minutes.
Yes.
Of the meeting.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Munster.
Thank you. I think I seem to recall that, Councillor Levitt, you said at the time it was very, very unusual for a call to account to occur, and it hadn't occurred at this authority for a number of years. I was just wondering, thank you very much for the report. It's obviously very, very detailed, and it pinpoint where we need to obviously improve and learn those lessons. Regarding the process of a call to account, is there any way or anywhere this council needs to improve that, or any lessons of which you would learn about the whole process?
I think, as I said in my report, that this sort of environment isn't really the best way of doing it. More of a round table type thing would have been better and would have been easier for people to talk. Doing it in chamber, and I understand the reasons for it. We couldn't have it in the other rooms because of the IT and everything like that, so we had to have it in this room. But it does sort of set this scene of acting in judgment, sitting up on there and people down here, and I think it's the same for the whole of Overview and Scrutiny. Actually, it doesn't apply just to this particular one. I think a more informal environment would make work better on anything like this and any call to account. I understand that stuff's in place to get that IT in place in there, which would help a lot. But I think that's actually an additional lesson learned, that this chamber, in some circumstances and some meetings, is not the right place to hold some of these types of meetings.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. In which case, the recommendation is that content of the report. Oh, sorry, start reading the wrong thing now. Go back to page 11, item 11. The recommendation is that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee refers this report, attaches Appendix A, along with the minutes to Council, together with a copy of the lessons learned in the appropriate section of the minutes of the meeting of 28th September 2022. Councillor Levitt, I assume you're happy to propose that, and I'm quite happy to second it. Do we have a debate on this? No, in which case can I take that to the vote?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Item number 15 of the agenda, which is the, oh, sorry. Sorry, no, we should go back to 15. Sorry, back to 15, everyone. But overview and scrutiny committee work programme. James to present.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, as usual, the work programme report is compiled from the report cycle, the forward plan and discussions with Chair, Vice Chair and the officers involved. In terms of the forward plan, as it's only sort of 3 weeks since our last meeting, the most recent version of the forward plan is still the 5th of January 2024, ahead of the February Cabinet meeting, which is yet to take place. Please feel free to suggest any items on there which are included for the March Cabinet meeting, which we can consider for the March ONS. The next forward plan will be updated on Friday, the 16th of February, ahead of the March Cabinet meeting. Again, if there's anything additional on there that you want including, please let me or the scrutiny officer inbox know. In terms of the work programme itself, that's not on this. Chair's report for Harkness Court project will be presented at the March meeting. It's been delayed from this one. And at the March meeting, we'll also have, amongst other stuff, the draft overview and scrutiny annual report, which is compiled and presented for consideration and comment here before it gets finally referred on to council in June or July time. And for new members of the committee, the overview and scrutiny annual report is an annual report detailing what's been considered here, the number of public attendees we've had in person, and also takes into account the YouTube streaming numbers that we have and the average time. So it presents all those statistics and it gets referred on to council to consider the effectiveness of the committee. In terms of the LGA peer review, it's pretty much the same as my last update 3 weeks ago. Nothing further to substantially say on it. I'm happy to provide any specific detail if members have any questions on items within it. I would just like to update that we have had one update on the scrutiny officer, which is interviews are taking place on the 31st of January, so Wednesday this week. We had 9 applications and 4 people have been shortlisted for interview, which will consist of a 10-minute presentation and formal interview questions, and I will happily update members should one of the interviewees be successfully appointed following that interview on Wednesday. As I was also going to touch on what Councillor Levitt just said about room 2 and room 3, we are now in the process and hopefully nearly at the end of that in being able to use room 2 and 3, and then the new scrutiny officer, fingers crossed, will be able to pick up that work and look at how better to run things like call to account, task and finish groups, and maybe some more smaller meetings in room 2 rather than, as you say, in the more formal council chamber. But yes, happy to take any questions from members.
Thank you, James. Councillor Munster.
Could I just ask, when you say using room 2-3, what do you mean? What sort of changes could we expect to see in there to actually sort of, enable effective scrutiny, shall we say?
So yeah, in terms of, obviously it's not set up specifically for scrutiny. It'll be used for as many smaller committees where we can. It will be used for task and finish groups if we ever have a topic to discuss in a task and finish group, they would take place in there. It then means that they can be streamed out. So we would have cameras in there. They wouldn't be this detail and you wouldn't have your names along the bottom of the screen as it is in here. But it would have a camera facility and it would have microphones on the ceiling, which would allow it to be recorded, broadcast, and heard from outside of room 2. And yes, it allows for a bit, I think that's what Councillor Levitt was saying, dynamic sort of layouts of the room. We can move the tables around in there, whereas here we're obviously static in this semi-horseshoe shape.
Thank you, James. Any other questions? Okay, I'll move on to the recommendations. I'll take these as a 3, but recommendation 2.1, that the committee prioritises topics for inclusion in the work programme attached as Appendix A and, where appropriate, determines the high-level form and timing of scrutiny input. 2.2, that the committee, having considered the most recent iteration of the forward plan as attached at Appendix B, suggests a list of items to be considered in its meetings in the coming civic year. And 2.3, that the corporate peer challenge action plan as attached at Appendix C will be considered. I'm happy to propose that. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Bryant. Do we have a debate on this, or shall we take it straight to the vote? Straight to the vote, please.
Yeah, that motion is carried.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, that brings the meeting to the close. The next overview and scrutiny meeting is on 12th of March 2024. Thank you and good night, everyone.